is on the phone, and because she's on the phone today, she's asked me to preside, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. The notice of meeting statement, Commissioner Thompson just got called out for a second for an emergency. So what I'm going to ask is Commissioner Unum, if you will read the statement for us. Thank you.
Certainly. A news release announcing the date, time, and place of the May 16th, 2019 Commission meeting was distributed May 14th, 2019 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office and on the website. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, and other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Next item would be the adoption of the agenda as presented. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Without opposition, the agenda is adopted, and just note that Commissioner Thompson wasn't present for that because of her emergency. At this time, I will proceed with the invocation. Through history, we as a society have learned that the best way to govern is for people to govern themselves. Today, in this tradition, we, as citizens, staff, and commission members, have traveled from our homes across the state to work as one community. Each of us arrives as individuals with unique ideas and experiences, but all with the need to serve the needs of others. As we gather to do this, we are reminded that although we have differences, we are all linked by this common goal. When we work together to move our community forward in a spirit of mutual respect and cooperation, we showcase what is best about our community, our state, and our nation. Let us strive this day to do that which brings happiness and joy to those who work with us and those we work for. Let us carry with us the spirit of service and goodwill today and in all our work to come. And this time we will start with the introduction of guests. If I could start at the front left. Thank you.
Ian Dalton, DDSN.
Janet Priest, DDSN.
Susan Duck, DDSN.
Pat Mary, DDSN.
Ron McBurney, DDSN.
Tana Vanderbilt, DDSN.
Rufus Britt, DDSN.
Nancy Holiday, DDSN.
Linda Lee, Whitman Center Parents Club President. I have a daughter at Whitman.
Okay.
Kathleen Roberts, Wood Center Parents Club. I have two sons there for 31 years that have passed and still advocating for disabilities.
Suzanne Johnson, Coastal Center Parents and Guardians.
They think it might be a liver, but they might can give him a pill.
Mr. Johnson, Parents Guardians, Coastal Center. That's my wife today.
John Hitchman, DDSN.
They don't
Austin
know.
Farrell, DDSN.
I don't know yet.
Do I have to give them community options?
Ray Miller, DD Council. Ben Horner, DDSN.
I'm Lori Manus, DDSN.
Louis Carter, Executive Budget Office.
Good morning, Mike Key, Marion Dillon, DSN.
Terry Todd with Bright Start.
Kelly Cox, Advocate and Parent.
Alfred Stevenson, Chester, Lancaster.
Mike Moss, Calhoun County Disabilities Board.
Stephanie Williams, Calhoun County DSN Board.
Floyd Warren, Babcock Center.
Beth Franco, PNA.
Joyce Kimmery from DDSN.
Ralph Courtney, Edgy County Board of Disabilities.
Joe County, DSN.
Kelly Mills, DIA.
Okay, I think that is the most circuitous route we've ever had in the introductions. But I think we got everybody. Thanks for keeping everyone on their toes. Next time on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 18th, 2019 Commission meeting. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review those. Does anybody have any amendments or changes to the minutes as proposed? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Without opposition, the minutes are then approved. Next item will be public input. First, we will have Ms. Deborah McPherson.
A couple weeks ago, I learned that an employee
employee at Witten Center had been arrested by SLED for burning a consumer of their left cheek, right arm, and left ankle with a cigarette lighter in 2017. Within a couple of minutes of learning of the employee's arrest, I checked the state judicial website and discovered that this individual had been arrested in August 2012 for assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature. Perhaps this charge was not prosecuted because the individual completed a pretrial intervention program. However, less than 2 months later, in October 2012, she served 7 days in jail for breach of peace. In 2014 and 15, she violated her driver's permit, and on another occasion, in 2015, she was stopped and charged with not using a seatbelt. These records on the state judicial site would certainly have caused me to question her being hired to work with vulnerable individuals at Witten Center in 2017. And my question is, am I missing something? Also, were there other consumers at Witten Center burned between the time the incidents occurred at Witten Center and when she finally was terminated after she confessed several months later and was finally arrested? When I was being considered for appointment to the DDSN Commission, a SLED background check was done, as well as my driving record was checked by the Senate Medical Affairs Committee. How is it that employees providing direct care to very vulnerable individuals with disabilities are hired with these kind of arrest records? How is it that I, a private citizen, can look up records posted on the state judicial website in less than 5 minutes and learn about arrest records? Are HR directors not checking the state judicial department website? There has to be a way for us to do a better job of screening and the hiring eligibility requirements that we're using. This cannot continue. I'm very concerned because just a couple months ago, I reported to you the findings that I found on an employee that was working at Mentor and who had been arrested for abuse of a vulnerable adult. So we need to see what we can do to improve this. Finally, I would like to express my thanks to the DDSN staff that expressed sympathy to my family in the death of my sister-in-law, Dale McPherson. Many of you may not know that Dale was the lady that sat at the sign-in table at commission meetings, better known as Happy Hour. 21 years ago, Dale was hired as an administrative assistant in the internal audit here at DDSN, and she later worked in the autism division and finally in the head and spinal cord injury division. Prior to working at DDSN, she had retired from the FBI with 37 years of service as a training coordinator for South Carolina law enforcement officers receiving training at the FBI Academy. She was probably one of the most generous people I've ever met. She was one of a kind. And one of the things that I will always remember about Dale, my daughter that went to college at Charleston was a freshman. My daughter's super smart, but doesn't have a whole lot of common sense. And when she got down there, her friends convinced her that putting diesel fuel in her car engine was fine. And she did it. And then she realized what had happened. And she called her Aunt Dale and she said, "I'm in trouble." And her Aunt Dale said, "Well, as long as you hadn't been arrested and you're not pregnant, everything's okay." And she said, "What do you need?" She paid for the car engine to be fixed. We never knew anything about this, nothing about it, till she got ready to be married and when the groomsmen told the story. So Dale was she would help anyone. She truly loved her family. She especially loved Heather. She loved animal life. And often she said that if heaven didn't have dogs, she didn't want to go there. But we're sure she's at peace. And we know that she was welcomed by more dogs than she could imagine. So I just want to share that with you, my stories and memories of Dale.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the IT staff, is there an issue over there that we need?
Well, it's a little blurry.
Okay. But we're still broadcasting, okay. Okay, all right. Okay. All right.
Sorry about that.
No problem, just making sure everything's good. I think we had somebody come in late who missed introductions in the back there. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Kelly Eifert, DHHS.
I'm David Foshee, I'm the IT director, I'm trying
It's good that you show up. This is why you show up. Is your distance from the actual equipment an indicator of how far we have to, got it, okay. Understand. Linda Lee, please, for our next public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a positive note this morning. As everyone knows, we've had a lot of difficulty at the regional centers getting qualified employees. And we thank y'all for your support. We initiated the Indeed.com to do a lot of job fairs and hiring, and it seems to be working. We've improved, and I see large classes coming in and see new people in our building, and it's so nice to see workers saying if their work over, it's because they agreed to do it instead of having to. So I think a lot of those things and that improvement over the past year, we're seeing a lot better environment at Whitney Center and at Coastal and the other centers. So I wanted to thank y'all for that. Then I also wanted to add a positive note. Whitten Parents Club did recently do our employee appreciation, as y'all had done, but we did our Beyond the Call, which was an award started by a resident at Whitten's family years ago when he told his parents he wanted them to do something for the workers that did extra. And we usually do 6 Beyond the Call. This year we couldn't narrow it down, we did 7. And so we were able to award them and really acknowledge the good work that workers are doing, because they've stepped up to the plate when we were short-staffed, and we appreciate that. And then I want to say that we're also doing a lot of fun things on campus, and on June 13th, we are having a music beach band. The Red Hot Pepper Band from Charleston is coming, and the community is invited, and so it will be an interactive evening from 6 to 9 evening, and at the pavilion right there, the Sibley Pavilion on campus. And everyone's invited, so if you're really looking for an evening of fun, Whitten's going to be the place on June 13th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the commissioner update. Any updates from any of the commissioners?
Well, I'll share my personal news that yesterday was my last day with Autism Speaks. If you're on Facebook, you already know all of this, but I have accepted a new position as CEO of the Council of Autism Service Providers, which is a national membership organization that represents autism providers around the country. So looking forward to starting that new venture next week.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you for that update. Next on the agenda is the nominating committee for officers for the upcoming year. Chairman Ravenel had initially appointed Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner Unum, Commissioner Broughton to that committee. It's my understanding that Commissioner Broughton will not be able to serve in that capacity. And so she yesterday had requested that I also serve on that committee. So for purposes of the nominating committee, I'm announcing that that will be chaired by Commissioner Thompson and that Commissioner Unum and I will be serving on that as well. Next item on the agenda is the policy committee update.
Okay, if you'll turn to tab 3 in your notebooks and go to the second page. So the policy committee has added the 2 highlighted areas on page 2 and 3. The first one is to try to separate policies from procedures, which is going to be a long, drawn-out process because we have so many administrative doing. Okay. So the policies will be defined as guiding principles and courses of action used to set direction. Procedures will be defined as a step-by-step methods used in order to obtain compliance with policies. Administrative directives that are policies, according to this definition, will require approval of the Commission. Administrative directives that are procedures, according to this definition, will not require approval of the Commission. As the policies and procedures are differentiated, we had a discussion about how we're going to evolve into who's going to decide what is a policy and what is a procedure. The Commission policy chair shall reach agreement with the staff in the category of each particular policy. In the case of ambiguity, which I assume means we can't agree, the policy committee shall make the determination of the policy versus procedure category. And do we want to move on or?
Let's review both changes.
Okay, the next one is the director will submit relevant information to the commission concerning all changes being considered by HHS that would affect the administering of federal funds for programs governed by DDSN it operates, including but not limited to rates and proposed changes in rates, billing methodology for providers contracted with DDSN, including recommending which agency providers are to bill, timelines of implementation for program changes, billing changes, or rate changes. The director will also submit relevant information to the commission concerning all requests for provider policy changes or corrections from entities contracted by HHS or DDSN. The commission will make recommendations to HHS concerning the implementation and operation of all programs that operates directly or through contracted providers. And the footnote at the bottom is the statutory basis. So originally my thought was that we would be able to opt out, and there was some discussion about that, and Lori pointed out that we're not sure if we can opt out legally. Of course, we could always get an attorney general's opinion on that, but it hasn't come to that yet, so we feel like this will probably, we'll try this, see if this doesn't help us out in our situation where by adding this, staff will bring to us, and we will vote and make recommendations to HHS and weigh in before instead of after. So that's the recommendation of the policy committee coming from the committee. I don't know if you need a second.
Coming from committee, we'll treat that as a motion without need for a second here at the commission meeting. Discussion, questions about the proposed changes? Yes.
I have a question on the second one, the second page we were looking at. The director will also submit relevant information to the commission concerning all requests for provider policy changes or corrections from entities contracted by DHHS. I just wonder if that's too much or an overreach to include all entities contracted with DHHS as opposed to just entities contracted with us. Can you just kind of speak to where that came from?
I will. I'd be glad to. There was an organization hired to study Medicaid and billing and rates and basically final rule. The one I'm speaking was final rule. And so all of these providers had to spend hours and hours on their action plans called the CAP to get ready for final rule, which is turning. It appears that it's turning and we've gone overboard. And I use that term we loosely. But I think when we attempted to weigh in about things like a fence around a CTH and stuff like that, it was not quite enough. I think what we should have done and the procedure should be is that we make a recommendation, that we come to the table and we sit and we say, we'll go this far, but we're not going to go any farther than that. Our recommendation is to not put this in the standards. Now, I asked that it be removed from the standards at that time before you came on, and it was not. It was moved from the scores on the dashboard on the internet, which, you know, we won't even go there. But as far as the removal from the standards, it wasn't. And instead of doing a plan of correction, they required then a corrective action plan. And at some point, somebody needs to tell me the difference. But we're spending a lot of time on that unnecessarily. So I just think that when they contract with an agency that is sent in to providers and they're mandated to do this, mandated to do that, we ought to be weighing in and making our recommendation before and not after.
And is the concern in terms of the scope of what entities is?
Yes.
And I look at that, and I think the limiting factor on that, as I interpret it, you correct me if I'm wrong, is actually in the previous sentence where it's relevant information.
Okay.
Because
relevant to
obviously,
programs,
yeah,
right,
obviously
that we are responsible for governing.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. That language does.
Yeah, because DHS contracts with 1,000 entities
Right.
that have nothing to do with what we do.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to make sure that
That's
we
why I
were
think it's-
imposing on staff the obligation to report to us on every policy change that has to do with anything DHHS contracts with. But yeah, I think relevant.
So we could say entities, we could say entities, that DDSN is involved with governing.
Well, with the
I
word
think
relevant
relevant
in there, I'm okay with
You
it.
got relevant?
But I had the same question, and that's sort of where I came back to, was it's relevant information. It's not-
Yeah, okay.
And if we need to change that, we'll come back.
But I think the relevant information is what defines that one.
One other question, back on the first one, on this, this is just a sentence structure, I may not be reading this right. As the policies and procedures are differentiated, the commission policy chair shall reach agreement with the staff. Is that supposed to be on the category of each particular policy? Shall reach agreement with the staff. It says, and the category of each particular policy. Am I not reading it right, or is that?
I mean, I think it could go either way. We're going to reach agreement as to which category it should go in. But you're saying.
The word "and" is wrong.
It
Change it.
doesn't read right to me. The commission policy chair shall reach agreement with the staff and the category of each particular policy.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like
you're
reach
right,
agreement
you're right.
With the staff and with the category.
Yeah, the category's all we need, so on is
Out the
good.
category or on.
Yeah, we can change that to on.
About it.
All right, so I am going to treat that as a motion to amend the proposal
Thanks.
to change the word "and" to the word "on," coming from Commissioner Unum, seconded by Commissioner Thompson.
Second.
For practice standpoint. So with that amendment, we'll vote on that amendment. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that amendment is passed. Any other questions? I have one, and Commissioner Thompson and I have talked about this. The question that I have is with the last sentence, where we have a document that's titled Executive Limitations Policy. So it's regarding the work that our executive director does. The last sentence is defining what the commission is doing. And I think 100% the commission has both the power and the obligation to do exactly what is said there in terms of making recommendations to DHS. We should be getting out of this. We should be participating in that process to make sure that our voice is being heard. I just question why that particular sentence is in this policy as it relates to the function of the executive director. It feels to me like that, well, again, we have that inherent power as a commission to do that.
But
that should not. Well,
we have the power.
We have the power. We haven't exercised it enough.
We have not.
We have not exercised it.
I think the reason for the last sentence is that it supports the reason for the first line in 15. The director will submit. This is what the director will do. And then what are we going to do with that information? It kind of closes that loop. We also need to put this in another policy that we have, but for now we can put it in this one and then we'll revise the other one.
And that's my question. I'm not opposed to the language. I'm just opposed to it being in this policy. It seems to expand this policy to put a requirement on us as opposed to our executive director.
Well, it does that all the way through this policy. I mean, there are some other,
there's a lot of what the executive director is supposed to do.
yeah, but I mean.
That's the only one that I found that was specific of the commission will do something.
You could take that last sentence and append it to the beginning of the first sentence and say, in order to permit the commission to make recommendations to DHHS, blah, 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 the director will submit relevant information to the commission concerning all.
Or not even permit, but to assist, because we're permitted to.
Yeah, we're permitted to in order to assist the commission in making recommendations.
I think Gary and I talked about the fact that we weren't given a very good roadmap when we came on the commission as to what our job was. And for people that come behind us, it's kind of hard to know what you're supposed to be doing.
Totally.
So this kind of clarifies it for the staff and for the commission. But I have no problem with changing that to in order to and moving it to the front.
I mean, that kind of addresses Gary's technical point.
Yeah, and that's really, to me, it's more of a technical issue that I think is addressed by that. And
I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
speaking of a roadmap, the problem staff is having right now with this, myself and staff, is exactly what the process is. It feels a little bit like a moving target. And if it was written down, and I think the only suggestion I had is that when you're dealing with policies and procedures and everything that y'all want to go, I have no problems with that. But we do business by those items. We run this agency with that. So when meetings are canceled or not held and things are held up, we have a bottleneck and it causes a time crunch. And sometimes we don't always have the luxury of time.
I agree with that.
So-
And the only time meetings have been canceled is when we didn't get the information in a timely manner. So that's really not on the agenda to talk about what this is.
Well, no, I mean, I'm going to let her
Okay.
talk, Vicki. I mean, that's,
I just, somewhere, and I think that one of the suggestions I had, since it's so expansive, and there's like every policy, every procedure, which is fine, I have no problems with that. But maybe it should almost have its own commission directive to talk about how, then you can get into how often the commission has to meet, you know, what items are brought, when they're brought, and more distinct. We want the roadmap. We want to do what y'all want us to do, but sometimes we kind of get a little lost as to what it is time frame wise, and you know, and that would be very helpful to staff.
But you're not so much objecting to this language as suggesting maybe there needs to be another
Commission policy, we
policy
talk about how
about-
directives are, you know,
Right.
how are they reviewed, how are they, you know, when do you get this stuff, and, you know, and put the meeting in a schedule that we know when things have to go, because a policy committee and agency such like this is going to have to meet at least prior to the commission meeting to get all this done, because it's just so much. And an hour meeting is just not nearly enough to get it, to actually get through everything. There's just the volume, it's just huge. You know, I mean, I'm used to bringing my policies and things to a board, but the number there is just so much smaller than here. It's just the sheer volume and the changes. And going forward, because we are going to be having a lot of new changes. I mean, we're being mandated to look at all of our rates, all of our residential. So we're going to have to work with HHS. There's going to be a lot more information coming through. I want the process to be crystal clear. I want us to not be late with getting you information timely, if that's what we're doing. I want everything to be the way it's supposed to be, but I want everybody out here to know what that process is. I don't want it to be murky at all. Because when you start getting into talking about money and changing things, it's got to be as clear as crystal.
No kidding.
yeah. Well, and I think that's the objective here, is to try to get more definition. I certainly think that having more definition of the process as it's under there is certainly the benefit of everybody, both us as commission and the staff, so they know exactly what's going on.
So is that another motion that Lori made to move that? Do we need another?
We have to, yes, we have to circle back on that. If we're
Okay.
taking that as a formal motion, yes, we do want to do that. And then I think we have to address
And I'll
the second
second
one.
that.
Okay, so as we're treating it, as I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the motion is to remove the last sentence and instead add at the start, right after number 15,
in order to assist the commission in making recommendations to SCDHHS concerning the implementation and operation of all programs it operates directly or through contracted providers, comma, the director will submit.
okay. Do we have that down?
Yes, sir.
Where that can be amended? Okay, all right. So that's the motion. It's been seconded by Commissioner Thompson. Any further discussion of that proposed amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of that particular amendment to the policy, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that amendment passes. Okay. Are there any other proposed amendments to the policy as submitted? Okay. So as amended, do we have a motion to approve the policy as amended?
I have one question.
Yes.
The $200,000, where does that, why is it 200,000 and not 100 or 300? Or, you know, just curious on that particular number, where that came from. Is that a?
In the past, it had been more, and we ran into problems with that.
Okay.
And felt like at that time, the commission at that time needed to look at everything over 200.
Okay.
That was the number we arrived at based on what we saw at that time. but it's a good question, and we need to continue to reevaluate that too, and make sure we're not holding up business. I haven't seen the projected problems with it that we were told we would have with it, because contract amendments over $200,000 that have been brought to the commission aren't the long line of things that we were told was going to happen. It's never panned out, so it's been doable.
Okay, good.
It was high enough that it didn't interfere with day-to-day operations, but low enough that it kept us in the loop on major changes.
Okay.
Was how that number was sort of settled on.
All right.
It floated a little bit.
That's right.
It went up and down, and we ended up settling on $200,000. And that's where the break seems to be.
Okay, great. All right.
Any other questions? Okay, so then we'll treat this as looking for a motion to approve as amended at this time. Do we have
So
that motion?
moved.
Yeah, have that. Do we have a second? Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that is approved. Taking up as underneath that on the policy committee update, what was just raised, I think, it would be a good idea for the policy committee, if there's a need for follow-up on that, to come together and do that. And I don't know what sort of the structure of when you guys have a meeting coming up.
We don't have one scheduled yet.
Okay. And we're going through all, basically we're going through all of the policies at this point in time. So it's certainly something that I think would be appropriate to follow up with. The more definition we have of what the purpose of these is the better. Nobody's going to be stepping on landmines without knowing it. If you step on a landmine, you should know it.
Yeah.
And it's been the problem that we've had as a commission is we step on landmines and we don't know it. That's
Every day.
That's the reason why we want to update this, but we also want to make sure that the staff is not stepping on landmines either, so that they have enough. So, I think that should be something, I guess for purposes of a motion under that, I would move that
You're chairing.
that's fine. Okay, well, I would entertain a motion. Because there's only 4 of us, and we've established that the chair can vote.
You established, but yeah.
But entertain a motion to have the policy committee further review and have a supplementary policy to define the procedure as contemplated under subsection 8.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, you have a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion of that? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any
I'm going to
abstaining?
abstain, yeah.
Okay. So Eva, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I vote.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Did you vote on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Aye.
okay. So let the record reflect that that motion passes with 1 abstention.
My comment is on that we have a certain amount of this that we have to be nimble on. So, for example, when the staff send out a policy on quality assurance and risk management and say it needs minor changes, and the process is they decide what's minor and what's major, that's not okay. Because we need major, huge overhaul in risk management, and we all know it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we write a process one way that says that, then we got to be able to turn and go back another direction when clearly we're going down the wrong path to start with. But we'll look at it and see.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of having.
Just we can't be closed in yet at this point on things like that have come up.
I agree. That's something to make sure that when we put the policy in place that we have that level of flexibility.
Right.
I agree 100%. It needs to be defined but flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a tricky path.
Which is why we haven't.
For things that are predictable, we can certainly provide guidance to the schedule of what needs to happen and when, I think.
All right. Anything further with regard to the policy committee? Okay, seeing none. Move on to the next item on the agenda. Mr. McBurney, you'll give us a legislative update.
Good morning. First thing I have put put on there is, something that's not written, not on your written sheet, but I just wanted to let, it's a good news, item that, when you brought up a couple meetings ago about our World Special Olympians, Josh Myers and, Scott Rohr from York County, when they got back from Abu Dhabi, I called the Special Olympics and asked them, you know, are we doing anything at the State House for them? They said they had a meeting with the governor. So I called the Senate and the House and got them to do resolutions. And it was one thing, it was late in the session, it was a last week thing for this. We actually had the recognition in the last week of the session, which is something they don't like to do, but they did for us, and it was a wonderful event. I think that the families and the Special Olympics, everybody, it was very well received. The legislators had a great time meeting Josh and Scott and recognizing them. So say kudos to our legislators for doing that. It also helps that Scott lives in the district of both the Speaker Pro Tem of the House and the President of the Senate. That actually made everything go through a lot smoother. So I told him you live in the most powerful House district in the state,
Yeah.
and so that I want to thank the legislature and their staff for doing that. That was wonderful work. So we had a good time on May 7th.
And thank you for thinking about that. That was wonderful. They had a great time.
Mm-hmm. And they, you know, I think, and the legislators had an equally fun time meeting them as well. Okay, the first item I have is the budget. The budget is in process currently, even as we speak. There's a conference committee meeting to hash out the differences between the House and the Senate. So there's not a lot of update I have other than everything that we've previously talked about. The dollar increase for our direct care workers, the $140,000 for the people aging out of adjudicated situations, as well as the Greenwood Genetic Center that the House gave us was still in the Senate budget. All that is still in. The Senate then gave us an initial $580,000 for the triage beds at one of the centers, and that is still in there. I have no indication from the House or the Senate that there's any problem with that in the conference, that that's an issue in front of the conference committee. If it becomes an issue, they'll let me know. But right now it's seems to be okay. And we'll see all this.
How long is that conference committee consideration on the budget supposed to take?
Well, they've got a lot of big issues to work out. The House and the Senate, over the course, they worked pretty well together. They kind of got into it a little bit at the end. And we kind of got caught up in another bill with that too. I'll talk about it in a little bit.
Okay.
But the issues are education. They've got the Senate put in a $600 bonus for employees that they took out of the debt service instead of taking it out of the regular budget. So there are some big issues, some big ticket items that they're arguing about right now. Nothing that affects us is in that discussion. The House Chairman Herb Kurzman's, our subcommittee, looked at the healthcare changes that the Senate had made, and they didn't have any problem with any of the changes that the Senate had made. I can't speak to how long the process is going. Their Chairman Smith's his desire is to have it done this week. And so they're coming back next week to deal with cleanup items. But I think they would like to send it to the governor by next week. You know, Whether that happens, that's not for me to say. That's not for me to say. Like I said, we're not involved in that part of that discussion. So, I certainly anticipate that we will have a budget finalized by end of next week, I would think. They have some other issues that they're dealing with too. They've got St. Cooper and a lot of other issues that they're dealing with. So that's about all I can say as far as the budget goes for right now. But that's like I said, we're okay. The next bill, our Commissioner Qualifications and Training, which Commissioner Lamel testified on. The subcommittee is still working on changes to it. That's carried over to next year. I don't foresee a problem with it. I think it'll be taken up early in the next session. I think we're going to have some really good positive changes to that legislation, and it should not be a problem.
Have we been giving them any input?
Yes.
More? Okay.
Yes, we have. They took on board both yours and Director Poole's your concerns about how things were worded in the bill, and those changes are being made.
Okay.
So yes, that should not be a problem. There will be another subcommittee hearing early on. We'll get to see what the amendment is before that. I should have an amendment soon from the committees as to what they're thoughts on that. Okay, and I will certainly share that with the commission when we get it. The next one is House Bill 3825 and Senate Bill 529. That is the medical decisions under the Adult Health Care Consent Act. That has consumed most of the last week for me. This bill, it got taken up in the 3M subcommittee, and it got bogged down making changes to it, to amendments that the members wanted to do. We've had some medical committee hearings in the Senate get canceled, and so it never got taken up in the medical subcommittee in the Senate, much to Senator Young's chagrin. There was a similar bill, 3602, and you're going to have to put on your How a Bill Becomes a Law add on for this, and call back to civics class for this. So what happened was he saw that a similar bill had come up, making a change to the priority on the Adult Health Care Consent Act. What 3602 did was it allowed any, like a friend, somebody who took somebody to doctor's appointments, things like that. If somebody was incapacitated, they could step in and make healthcare decisions for the patient if they conveyed that they reasonably knew the patient and could convey their wishes. Since that was a change to the priority list, and it was the priority list, and it was similar to our bill, Senator Young attached our bill 529 to that legislation. And it got sent over to the House, and the House and the Senate were in they also attached a couple other Senate bills that the Senate wanted the House to agree to, dealing with appointments and other things to it. And the House was in the mode of stripping everything out of it that the Senate did, and taking the bill back to the original House version. So that's where we are, except for one thing. They did leave us in the priority list. When they made that change, they left us in the priority. So we actually, most of 90% of what we want out of the bill is in there now. So we're in a conference committee, and there's 3 members in the House, Representative Rose, who's the original sponsor of 3602, Merle Smith, who's also the chairman of Ways and Means, and Representative Jeff Johnson. They are the House conferees. The Senate conferees are Senator Tom Davis from Beaufort, Senator Mike Gambrell from Greenwood, and Senator Jeff Johnson from Manning. So we're working with the conference committee, and I'm optimistic that we're going to have something done for the Adult Health Care Consent Act by next week. I think we've got, last week we had a breakthrough where we had protection advocacy, the state bar, the hospital association, everybody signed on to our changes that we had made. And are working on behalf of those changes. So I am optimistic that we can get that done with in the conference committee. So we will hope that I have a meeting on Monday morning for the conference committee on Monday morning. So we will see on that. Any other questions on that? Okay. One other good news item, Commissioner Blackwood, we got a vote on that, on her, before they ended for the year. So we got her appointed. That was a legislative victory as well. The other items we have on here, the Vulnerable Adult Abuse Registry and the creation of the Early Childhood Development Education Agency, advocate, whatever they're contemplating there. Work is going to continue on in the interim on that. This is the first year of a 2-year session, so work can happen on in the interim on those bills, and I feel like we'll have meetings in the interim talking about that. Budgetary changes that have to be made, as well as the Vulnerable Adult Abuse Registry has budgetary concerns as well as constitutional concerns that need to be addressed. And then I think they have to come to some conclusion about what they want to do with the early childhood development education function. Another thing that we'll be doing in the interim, we'll be looking at the further recommendations from the Legislative Oversight Committee, and we'll be putting those in, and then we will also be getting the regulations ready to go and sent to the General Assembly.
Okay. Thank you for that update.
Anybody have any questions?
All right.
Can I just say one thing about the 3825? That's going to have to be, when that gets passed, we're going to have to go back to policy committee on our, you can sit down, that's all right. We're going to need to talk about another layer of requirement. We discussed this when we were in the committee, that we need to require names of the folks that people are, that do not have families, and the executive director might have to be a surrogate for. That needs to be brought up here, and we need to have documentation as to what they have done to look for family. I think that was the two items that were absolutely essential to making this work. And I think that that's the perfect directive for it to go into, and then we can add it into the standards for residential habilitation upon, like, someone coming into a residential facility, that we start that process. And in also helping this, as part of our person-centered training, we're trying to get case managers now to go back, again, old school, go back and develop a good social history for folks. So we get more names on that tree versus maybe one or two contacts, that we have more family developed. So if, God forbid something happens to the immediate family, 10 years down the road, you've got actual names to do the Google with, because otherwise you have no place to go. And so, and this used to be done back in the day. We had very well developed social histories. So putting it in the directive, putting it in the standards, and then also putting it in our training as to this is what we're looking at. The statute gives DDSN the authority to be the surrogate. However, we have designees out in the community that know folks. So we want to make sure that we know, one, who they are, And then two, that there is some methodology as to the documentation of ongoing, I'm looking for folks. I'm looking for families, and that would be that'd be an example of a policy, once we get this thing nailed down, to go back and get that policy updated to reflect all of that.
Okay, there's a dual relationship policy that was on the policy agenda for the last meeting, and we never got to it because we spent all our time on the executive limitations policy. But what I had in mind there is we need to establish a policy as a commission too, that we think it's okay for a caregiver to be the surrogate, to be the advocate or primary correspondent or whatever. And it's great that we have a policy in place that says they're going to look for someone else, but there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. So I'd like for the staff to get us information about how they get around that conflict of interest in other states. That do they consider that a conflict of interest? Because that conflict of interest has been pointed out to us several times by different advocates, and sometimes the executive director doesn't necessarily need to be the primary correspondent and make decisions about placement, for example, if those people are if they also have other interests in a certain placement for an individual. So I think we have to, as a commission, decide what our policy is on that. Do we think that's an acceptable practice? So I think the policy on dual relationships is where we need to address that. I mean, you can go ahead and address it as far as training and effort to try to make sure there's no conflict, but there actually is an inherent conflict when you've exhausted all efforts and you come up with the same outcome. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there's really a policy issue that has to be decided on at some point.
Is that something that we need to have a motion on as far as having the policy committee take it up like we did previously?
No, it'll just stay on the agenda until we get to it, I guess, or, it's on the list.
It's on the list, right.
And we need to remember what the actual Adult Healthcare Consent Act actually is about. So when we get all the language, and we can sit and have that discussion of what is actually covered in that. So I think that would be a good spirited discussion.
Okay. All right. Next up, budget update, Pat.
Good morning. First thing I want to say is we hired Chris Clark as our new Chief Financial Officer.
That goes my director's report. Just
Well, it's good news. Chris will be starting on June 3rd, and I cannot imagine a better hire at this time for the agency as we're changing payment systems, and we're very fortunate to have the services. If you go to tab 5, we have a handout, which is our normal monthly handout pertaining to BHDD expenses. As we said before, the good side of our business is we can measure our expenses to every penny. The VAN system keeps a lot of certainty in our expenses, and I think we've been very cheap this year, in a simple word, that we are operating 2% under our budget. But the most important thing this time of year is our revenue forecast. In the Medicaid agency, with variable revenue streams that come in based on billings and a number of complex transactions during the year, to make them executed by the year end is quite the task, and our finance manager, Tom Ritter, has done a great job. We've been, our projections for the year was to end with a positive cash balance carries forward of 1.7 million. All our cash projections have been right at that or a notch above it. Our Medicaid revenue comes in the third Tuesday of the month, came in Tuesday. So Tom's been cranking on that for a day. And right now, our estimation is that we're going to be on the positive side at $331,000. Last year, this time, that gave me, like, what do you mean we're at $331,000? How do you run a $20 million operation and have that close of a margin? We're still doing it, and And at the very end, I'll talk about that, because that's just got to change. We're just not, we cannot measure with that level of precision in our reserves. The good news, every year when we close out our books, we will, in our business, we're a contract business, we put money out prospectively and then we settle up. So we'll be settling up all our accounts before June 30th. And that goes with the day logs and the res logs, and we will squeeze money out of there to give us the cushion, I think, for something unexpected. We have a number of contracts out for self-directed respite, which we'll be settling up and squeezing money out of. So I'm confident that we're going to end the year without a problem. It's the however. We're going to start next year with literally no reserves. This has been going on for 3 years. And this year, Mary had a hiring freeze. Other than DSPs and nurses, every hire after that has to be approved by Mary. And we've been attriting people out. We have been hiring people in key positions. We cannot not hire key positions. Rufus has done a great job on bringing order to the state-funded residential settings, which saved us a dramatic amount of money. He brought some order to the rates that we provide providers that are more reasonable in the past. And we looked at all our non-service contracts, and next month we'll be proposing over $1 million of cuts there. I say all that is we have a revenue problem at this agency. I believe that when we go to fee-for-service and get out of bands, we'll be able to match so much of our money so much better. It will solve all of our problems and fund future rates. However, until we get there, we have to be fiscally sound for fiscal year 2020. And as we go into next year, we can't wait until August to come here with a budget proposal for you. We probably will have to wait for the new CFO to get on board. But next month, we will have to talk about proposing cuts to our non-service contracts. And there may be some services in there, some state-funded services. And we're also going to have to talk about ways to increase revenue for our current band system. And part of that is looking at how we currently do business. As you all know, there's many exceptions to the band system that were made possibly 5, 10, 15 years ago. And as we are scrubbing every penny, we are coming up with situations where we really can't figure out why certain things were done, that we may have to propose to reverse the flow to provide some financial cushion to ourselves so that as we go into next year, we will continue to be frugal, but at the same time, we have to be responsible to have enough of a reserve. So we'll be proposing that next month. To make a long story short, we will end the year like we did last year and get through it. But each year, our cash reserve, we have less cushion. And I will end with that final is the hiring of Chris Clark. There is not a better person that could have both the provider side and the band system experience, let alone 27 years of public accounting experience to help us make that shift. That's a great asset to the organization. It gives us confidence that as we try to flip the bands, which to me is 90% of our problems and opportunities, that we're in good hands and but that'll be a challenge for next year. Any questions? Thank you.
I think we have a motion then with regard to the staff requesting a motion with regard to the financial update.
To accept the financial.
Okay. So would then entertain a motion to accept the financial update as presented.
So moved.
Have a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that update is accepted. Next item on the agenda is a final rule update from Janet Priest.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm gonna test this because that usually doesn't work well for me. So I'm Janet Priest. I'm currently the IDRD Division Director, which is a little bit of a misnomer, but we won't get into that. I've been tasked with spearheading some of the efforts of DDSN's efforts around the home and community-based settings final rule. So just a little bit of background for you. This regulation was introduced by CMS in 2014. It became effective March of 2014, several years ago now. Initially, when it was issued by the federal government, all states were expected to be fully compliant by March of 2019, and subsequently, and thankfully, they issued an extension so that states are not required to be compliant until March of 2022. Some of the key provisions of the rule are that all settings in which Medicaid services are delivered, Medicaid home and community-based waiver services for DDSN purposes, the settings in which those services are delivered are expected to be home and community-based, and the federal government has defined that as the settings must have the qualities that are listed in the PowerPoint, which are that the setting is fully integrated in and supports full access to the greater community. The setting is selected by the individual from among other setting options. The setting ensures an individual's right of privacy, dignity, and respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. The setting optimizes the person's independence, autonomy in making life choices, and facilitates choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. When home and community-based services or waiver services are delivered in a residential setting that is controlled by the provider, owned or controlled by the provider, then there are some additional requirements that the regulation sets forth. So these are not applicable to all services, it's just those settings where the provider owns the setting. So when those services are delivered in a provider-owned or controlled residential setting, the following conditions also apply. The individual has a lease or other legally enforceable agreement that provides protections similar to a lease. The individual has privacy in their living unit, including lockable doors, choice of roommate, freedom to furnish and decorate their unit. The individual has freedom and support to control their own schedule, activities, and that includes access to food at any time. The individual can have visitors at any time, and the setting is physically acceptable. So the federal government recognized that for all people, the conditions noted as in 1 through 4 may not immediately be appropriate for everyone. So recognizing that, the regulation stipulates that those conditions may be modified for a person when there's a specific individualized assessed need, when positive interventions and supports have been tried and found not to be successful. It stipulates that when one of those conditions is modified, there's a plan for restoration, and there are established time limits for review of that modification. So in essence, they're saying it's fine to modify it when the person has a need for modification, but you can't do it forever. You need to help them learn to help that condition to be restored. The modification must include the informed consent of the person, and it must assure that the intervention and support will cause no harm. So again, there are only 4 things, and I'll go back, that can be modified: the lease, privacy, support and control their own schedule, activity, and access to food, and having visitors. The settings rule also specifies settings that are not home and community based. These are not new. The settings listed are basically institutions, and waivers are a waiver of an institutional requirement. So if you're in an institution, you cannot be also in a waiver. These are nursing facilities and intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities. In addition to the settings that are not home and community based, which are the institutions, the rule specifies settings that are presumed to have the qualities of an institution. And again, it's presumed. So the settings that are presumed to have the qualities of an institution are settings that are in a public or privately owned facility that provides inpatient treatment. Settings that are on the grounds of, adjacent, or immediately adjacent to a public institution. So again, for us, a public institution would be a regional center campus or a DDSN sponsored community ICF. So again, those are considered public institutions. Settings that have and the last category is settings that have the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid, home and community-based services from the broader community of individuals not receiving home and community-based services. So the federal government kind of set out a general heading of those settings that are presumed to have institutional qualities, and then listed 3 different kinds of those settings for states to follow. So when the settings rule was originally released in January of 2014, it noted that if states wanted to include any of these settings in Medicaid programs, that
Sorry.
That's fine. If they wanted to include these settings, they could include the settings. It's not an automatic that the setting is put out of the Medicaid program or can no longer receive Medicaid funding. But in 2014, they said if you have any of these settings, then a determination must be made by CMS that the setting is home and community-based and does not have the qualities of an institution. So that determination by CMS is kind of referred to as heightened scrutiny. Heightened scrutiny seems like an artful choice of words. Heightened scrutiny is actually for the facilities or the settings that the state believes are good settings, that the state believes are home and community based. They just happen to have some of the qualities that are outlined by the federal government. So the point is that settings that are referred for heightened scrutiny are good settings. CMS basically says that if you have settings that are in these categories and they're not good settings, then you don't even send them for heightened scrutiny. Okay, so again, the settings that might need a determination by CMS are those settings that are presumed to have the qualities of an institution, which are inpatient treatment facilities on the grounds of an ICF and have the effect of isolating. The first 2 are fairly concrete. You know whether you're in an inpatient treatment facility. You know whether or not you're on the grounds of or adjacent to an institution. The last setting is a little more general and a little bit more subjective. So that's why that CMS allows states to have some latitude with defining the settings that may have the effect of isolating. So for South Carolina, the definition now includes a community residential care facility that was formerly an ICF that's located next to another CRCF that was also formerly an ICF. So many years ago, there was a trend in the creation of ICFs based on the number of people you could have living next to each other. So there were 2 8-bed ICFs built sitting next to each other with 16 people living there. A lot of providers have chosen to no longer be ICFs and they have converted them to CRCFs. The license changed, so there is a thought that the state should make sure that the setting operation is different. A HUD 811 apartment complex. These complexes are disability-specific complexes. The only people that may live there are people with an intellectual disability. When they entered into the HUD contract, the contracts were for 40 years, and that's actually longer than I've been at DDSN, by a little bit.
By a little bit.
So those apartment complexes are disability-specific. If you don't have that specific disability, you can't live there. So the only people that can live there, that can have a lease to live there, are people with intellectual disabilities. So that is a little isolating. Not that it is, it has the presumption of isolation, okay? Settings with a locked fence that surrounds the property. So again, there's nothing inherently wrong with a fence. There are white picket fences that are beautiful. There are chain link fences that are beautiful in some people's eyes as well. There are fences that are necessary for animals. That's fine. All of that is fine. The issue comes in when you have surrounded the property with a fence and the fence is locked. Again, that is not inherently wrong. The issue becomes typically when you think about locked fences, they are either there to keep people in or keep people out. So typically, the point of a locked fence is either to keep people in or keep people out, which can have the effect of isolating. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. There may be a perfectly good reason to have a locked fence. Locked fences in and of themselves are not wrong or bad. It's the presumed institutional nature. And I think it is very easy to overcome that presumption.
Can I give an example?
Sure.
We have a CTH2 on a road called Highway 55, and it's called Highway 55. That's also the speed limit on the road, and it's right down from a high school. So when that high school lets out at 3 o'clock, those kids get in that car and they're zooming up the highway. In fact, we've had at least 2 accidents right in front of the house where our staff has helped the kids. There is a fence that goes around the property. It's a very nice fence, a very expensive fence. It's got a very large gate on the side where the cars pull in. That gate was re-engineered, again, at a very high cost, to stay open all the time. So it is not a locked fence, but we have an individual who has had a history of running out into the road. So when staff sees X, Y, and Z happening, they have a fob where they can electronically close that gate just to give them time to get a handle on the situation. So, because if she runs out in that road, the odds are you can get hit by a car. But on the opposite side of the property, and the property is fairly large, it's well over an acre. On the other side of the property is a perfectly good walk-through gate that doesn't even have a gate on it. It's not locked. So if she needs to walk and move, she can do that, but away from the road. So that is not isolating. That's there for a safety reason. It's in her plan. And the gate is open. So, and everybody on that road has those kind of fences in front of their houses because of the road. So it's perfectly normal for that situation. And that's how you write your CAT plan.
And the adjudication of a situation like that is simple.
Yep.
It's done, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
The issue here is that the state took the time to look. There are other settings included in the settings rule include day services and day programs. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I can, well, let me ask you while we're on this. My question is, and if you said this and I missed it, I apologize. Who came up with these additional definitions? South Carolina specific, this is going to be presumed isolating.
So the responsibility for determining the definition rests with the Department of Health and Human Services. They did discuss it with us, and so we did have some input, or we did have at least the opportunity to weigh in.
Who's us?
DDSN, I'm sorry.
Staff?
Staff at DDSN.
Mm-hmm.
The last one is that there are 3 or more waiver settings that are clustered together. Let me go back to the locked fence just for a minute. I was saying that this also includes day services.
One question. Was the commission, because I don't know when this was done, but was the commission ever consulted on these things?
Was the commission ever consulted on these things?
I don't know.
This last group of items have just been based on new guidance from CMS that just came out maybe 2 months ago.
The guidance came out in March.
Right. And so over that time, they gave more latitude to states to go look at their list, because at one point we were at places where there were 2 or more. I mean, we've come down off of that original list to what the state is going to look at as being isolating. And that's one of the reasons why you're having this update today, because this finally has been handed out by HHS as what we're going to be looking at as a state. The feds have given the states a lot more latitude as to how they come up with that
Well,
definition.
and I guess the reason I didn't ask the question, I didn't mean to be asking a lightning rod question about the relationship between the commission and the agencies. That wasn't the purpose of my question. The purpose of my question is, the feds have set forth the requirements, and so I'm wondering, is this what all the states are doing, is then further defining? Because the federal requirement is just that it not be a setting that has an isolating effect. It seems to me that the state ought to be, on a case-by-case basis, examining whether it's a setting that has an isolating effect, not coming up with another list of things that are presumed to have an isolating effect. Do you know what I'm saying?
I understand that. In South Carolina, we have about 1,300 settings. Most of those settings are not isolating. An SOP1, meaning somebody who lives in an apartment that they chose on their own, an apartment complex that you and I would rent. There's no need to do an examination of those settings.
Right.
Certainly there are settings that do not fall in these categories that could be isolating. We think that we have other ways to identify those. What we are trying to do is specify in the statewide transition plan, which I'll talk about in a minute, how the state is going to go about this effort. So,
Case by case for 1,300 places, if you can narrow that list down to just a few.
Yeah, but it seems like what we did was create more. We said a locked fence is going to be presumed to have an isolating effect, whereas the federal rules don't say that. So
Right, and then
they said it has the effect of isolating, and so I believe the attempt was to try to determine what in the state might have the effect of isolating.
So what we'll do is we'll take Alliant, and Alliant will come out there, and they'll take that list, and we'll be sending the mixed signals again. I think you're right. I don't think that's a really good approach, and I'd be curious to know what the other state approaches were.
And I actually don't know, this is not something I've researched in other states, but I'm just asking genuinely, is this the way other states approach it, by coming up with a state-defined list that is a subset of the federal?
Yes.
Okay.
It is typical of a state to take the vague, have the effect of isolating criteria and define what it means for the state.
Okay.
Most states have done that. This is unique to South Carolina because South Carolina is different. And so we have come up with our own. We've been through a few iterations of this. When the rule was initially issued, we relied on information from CMS, interactions with other states. CMS has contractors that are dedicated to this as their experts, providing technical assistance and guidance to states. And so based on the best information that we had, we came up with a definition. The settings that fell into have the effect of isolating was some ungodly number. At one point, it was like 900.
So the purpose of the definitions is to narrow that number down.
Right.
Correct.
By defining it further, we narrow it.
Narrowing
So,
down the
It's
number
a definition of
settings.
exclusion rather than a definition of inclusion
That's
is the idea behind it.
Correct.
Okay.
So again, these settings,
Well-
No, it is. It is bringing it way down.
it's brought it, the number of settings has come way down. These settings are subject to the determination by CMS. So the settings that aren't on this list are not subject to the determination by CMS that they can continue to participate in Medicaid. The broader the definition is, the more settings will have to be determined by Medicaid to be able to participate. So we're very thankful for this current definition. So again, you'll see what that means for South Carolina.
Before we go on, Commissioner Ravenel, did you have a follow-up question? I thought I heard you say something.
Hold on a second. I was just wondering why, if we're the governing body, why is the commission, in on these recommendations and things of that nature? I mean, are we just allowing the staff to do it?
I mean, that's why it's on the agenda today, is we're bringing this forward to show you what has
been decided.
And the point being there, the recommendations were made by DDSN, our staff, to CMS. But
Our recommendations were made to DHHS.
to DHHS, sorry, DHHS.
Right.
But at no point was the commission asked to approve those recommendations.
That's my
Right.
problem.
Right, I understand, and right.
And they said, why'd you vote on that? I said, I don't know anything about it, or I know about it, but I wasn't, asked to vote on it. It was already done. They made recommendations to HHS, and then we heard about it afterwards.
Well, the recommendations have been, there hasn't actually been.
I'd like to know, I think we need to discuss it, and we need to make that determination.
Can I get back to Lori's point? I just want to make this.
Does anybody else have an opinion on that?
Yes, Eva, yes, but we'll go back.
It's been a moving target since 2014.
I want to go back to Lori's thing about, are we decreasing or are we increasing? And if you go back to what you gave us on the federal one, it's too bad we don't have those side by side, but the lease thing, the privacy in their unit, lockable doors, choice of roommates, freedom to furnish or decorate, his or her own schedule, including access to food at any time, can have visitors at any time, which that needs a lot of work and clarification. But it doesn't say anything in those about a fence. We added that in South Carolina.
What we were trying to do, so all settings, not just the provider-owned and controlled settings, any settings where Medicaid services are delivered that are presumed to have the qualities of an institution. And they list the presumed qualities of an institution as those that are in an inpatient setting on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to an institution, and settings that have the effect of isolating. There are some states that initially thought they would say that every setting had the effect of isolating, and they were going to send all of them for heightened scrutiny. South Carolina did not decide to go that route. South Carolina has made efforts to define what that means. So
why can't they define it? They're 5 miles from a Dollar General. Why does it have to be a fence?
Because it has the effect of isolating. Again,
it also has the effect of protecting.
Absolutely.
And that's why you write the
And
capital.
that's why you have a modification. And again, no one is saying that this is wrong. Fences are the most locked fences that completely surround a property are the easiest thing to adjudicate. It should not be a problem at all. We have fences that surround day programs. Day programs have contract work materials get stolen. They have vans that get broken into. There are a lot of reasons to have a locked fence. It's only the presumption that you're locking people in or locking people out. And once it's determined by the state that neither of those things is happening, it's over.
Then we're saying specifically that's not an isolating thing, therefore it's not subject to review. I mean, I understand I understand the process behind it. You have to have certain things that may, on first glance, appear to be isolating, and by defining them as not being isolating, we remove that one from the heights.
We're saying this is good.
I get that.
So this is just a way for the state to say,
reduce the number of
we've done
heights.
our due diligence, we've defined it this way, and these are the number of settings that we have. The number of settings that we have that are presumed to have institutional qualities are, we have no settings in a publicly or privately owned facility that provides inpatient treatment. We have 10 settings that are on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution. And we have 117 settings that, based on the state's definition, have the effect of isolating or may have the effect of isolation.
And that number 117 is down from 900. We went from 900
Correct.
down to
Yes.
117 by making these definitions. So we
Correct.
reduced the number of facilities that are subject to heightened scrutiny by making
Less
these
than
definitions
10%.
work in our advantage. Right.
And the truth of the matter is, the fences that may qualify are about 3, 4. I didn't count that number. It's not many.
There's.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
We're hearing about this. It's already decided, so there's really no point in carrying, I mean, yeah, it's done once yet again, and we're going to have to be responsible for whatever this is or turns out to be. But it's one thing when your understanding of it and you're communicating your understanding of it, and then it's got to go through a lion and it's got to go through a board, and then you got people writing letters to Lindsey Graham and everybody else in the country about, oh my God, we can't live with this final rule stuff, and so then we call a whole lot of attention to ourselves. It's just that now here we are. I mean, Eva has a good point that we should have weighed in on this, made a recommendation on it, but once again, we didn't. So
Yeah, and that sort of fundamentally comes down to the question of the purpose of the commission. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to do that. That's not, but I do think it is relevant. I think it is very important that DDSN make recommendations to DHHS with regard to these things so they know what we're looking for. That's super important. The question fundamentally that I think we as a commission have to get answered, and we have to provide more definition to staff, is at what point in time do we as a commission get involved in that process? Because where we're getting involved now is you're explaining to us what's happening, which is great. I love the update, so that when somebody comes to me with these questions, I can answer this. The issue was, would it have been possible to get us involved before the final recommendations were made to DHHS? Yeah.
I hate to say
To executive staff.
Yeah, I understand.
and the
I'm not-
reason I'm going to say that this has been a moving target now for years. We always knew first the 2014, I wasn't here, and to the to having the implementation date of 2019, we knew that 2019 wasn't going to happen, and we knew they were going to put out guidance, but they take so long to get the guidance to you. So you start with a preliminary, let's look at everything, and we come up with all these sites. What was it, 1,100? And we have all these different, 1,200, I'm sorry, different sites. We know we cannot do that. That is not what the end is going to be. I think just over the last few weeks, we have gotten down to actually these numbers, because it is a matter of actually visiting sites, because I know you went out there and looked and took a few off the list. So we are finally, I don't know, Kelly's in the audience, but this is we're just gotten to this over the last couple of weeks. This is not old stuff. And this is not anything that if you all stood up and said, we don't agree with this, we want something else changed, we can bring those recommendations. But ultimately, I mean, you can recommend whatever you want, but ultimately this is a CMS rule, and they're they're the Medicaid agency, and they're the ones that have to write the transition plan. So the transition plan, what we're trying to do is mitigate as much as we can going into that transition plan. This is the final numbers that we've got. There is I don't think any certainty that this might even be the final thing if they go ahead and issue more guidance on something. We've been waiting for this guidance. I know you said it came out in March, but we've been waiting for it. I was told it was coming out in August. So this is another thing that just takes forever to get out there. I won't come to you and say, we're going to send 900 programs to heightened scrutiny when we know that's not going to happen. So coming down to the number that we're getting closer to the implementation date, so maybe the information we're getting is starting to finish trickling out, and this is where we are. So I don't think that I guess last commission meeting we could have said no, but I couldn't because I didn't know.
Well, but I guess, and not to be running with this.
I am not trying to be
No,
belligerent.
we're not trying to be, and I'm not trying to be belligerent either. I'm trying to define what our role is as a commission. And at some point in time, recommendations came, and they may have been an ongoing series of recommendations
It's just an
over
ongoing
20.
process.
Right, but the problem that I have as a commissioner is that this is a big deal. I mean, and this is something that we as commission, I feel, should at some point in time have said, okay, staff is making this recommendation, staff wants to make this recommendation to DHHS. We'd like you to ratify that this recommendation is what you as a commission think is appropriate. I mean, I think it's great that we minimize these numbers. The objective is to get as much out of the heightened scrutiny as we can. That's the ultimate objective here. I just would have liked for us to have been more involved. I mean, I think that's what Vicky's saying. I think that's what Eva's saying.
And we're not even to the point of these going to heightened scrutiny yet, right? They still have to July to, you're going to get to that. See, we're jumping there.
I guess the other thing is that recommendation might be a little strong because we have routine meetings and we have conversations.
Yeah, it's not really.
So I will say that. This criteria has not yet been submitted to CMS for their approval. And there is a possibility that CMS could ask for additional information, and it will be put out for public comment before it goes to CMS.
Right, but it has been submitted to DHS for DHS to send it on to CMS, if I understand correctly.
See, HHS essentially created it.
Yeah.
They created it with input from us.
Conversations.
Well,
Right, conversations.
We have to give them
Not
staff.
us, DDSN. DDSN had input, and again, and I'm not.
We have to give them the
I'm not-
sites. They don't know where these places
Right,
are.
exactly, I understand. I'm not, and I'm really honestly not trying to make this confrontational. I really don't want to do that. But
You're trying to state a bigger point.
yes, exactly. This is an example of what frustrates us on the and this is it feels like it's fait accompli. These conversations have taken place over a long period of time. That's fine. But at some point in time, somebody from our side said, we want to have the definition of locked fence. We'd like to define a locked fence as opposed to any fence. At some point in time, that was done without ever us knowing that was going to them. Does that make sense? It's a symptom of a bigger issue that we've struggled with.
I think that was not, we didn't make that recommendation. I think we
Okay.
might have said
So-
locked.
Okay.
So that a regular fence for safety would not be considered,
Right. Okay, well, that's,
just
that's
any
relevant.
old fence. We didn't want any old fence. We wanted, it had to really be so that people could not have access out of
Yeah,
it.
understood.
So-
But that's relevant. That's a good thing, but it's something that I think that, and again, this is more sort of a going forward kind of thing that we feel, as at least 3 members of this commission would like
And
to
I
have
think-
more input on before the staff.
And I think that's the reason why we need that, we need the process
Yes.
issue.
Right, I agree.
Because we don't know when, this is a series of conversations. This is not, oh, here we are, let's go ahead and go over here. We're finally getting more towards, this is probably what's going to be submitted to CMS at this point. But we hadn't had that prior to this.
Okay,
So-
why don't we take this new executive limitations policy out for a spin? I recommend that staff find another way to narrow down the definition of isolation other than the fence in the sub-list. Is there another way that we can narrow that down other than send that mixed message of the fence? Because that is the one issue. You can't change that there's a CTH in Oconee next to a hospice house, and that's considered to be a public institution for whatever reason. But you can
It's not even on the list. is it?
lighten their load. Well, it's written up by Alliance, they do a plan of correction, a corrective action plan. So the thing is the big issue here with 3 providers that wanted to talk last month and were put off and then decided they'd wait and see if something was new that they could hope for, that they didn't have a problem anymore. The big thing that keeps reoccurring that I'm hearing about is the fence. And I know about you can mitigate this, you can mitigate that, but when you put that in there and people don't put up a fence when there needs to be one, if we're not very, very clear about what our expectations are, and so far we haven't been, I'm not sure this clears it up a whole lot either, as a provider, I'm sitting there going, I'm gonna think twice before I do that. But why don't we recommend that we find another way on the sub list? And, and they can come back and say, no, we're doing it with the fence. We're doing it this way. But I mean, I don't have the big issue with the fence. And I don't think it narrows anything down. I think it creates a bunch of cobwebs and it's not clear. And it's risky.
Well, at the end of the presentation, if you want to make a motion, can we come back to it? Is that simple to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Okay. I don't want to come back to it, but can we
Yeah.
get through the rest of the presentation?
Yeah.
Because we kind of got Janet up here in
limbo.
So let's keep going forward then with the presentation, and we'll come to motions at the end.
So based on the proposed criteria, there are no settings in an inpatient treatment setting. There are 10 on the grounds of or adjacent to an institution, and there are 17 that are determined to have the effect of, 117 that have the effect of isolating. Okay, so another key provision of the
Isolating based on CSM's final rule?
correct.
Or the state list.
It's the presumed institutional, 3 categories. The last one has the effect of isolating. So based on the criteria the state set for, or the state has proposed for settings that have the effect of isolating, there are 117 settings in the state. Okay.
So if we happen to change that for some reason, that number might fluctuate.
Correct.
And the
You can
definition
broaden it,
definition of who
then it'll
we
be
is
bigger.
also, we being not DDSN, but being HHS and CMS.
Okay.
And we're not the only ones covered by this plan too. There's other operators of facilities that receive home and community-based money. We just happen to be the largest.
Right.
We have so many settings.
Who's an example of some of the others?
Adult day healthcare centers,
Okay.
that would be one.
And they're not regulated by us, they're regulated by
No.
DHHS?
A DHEC.
Okay.
They do the licensing.
And the state definitions of what may trigger an isolating inquiry, are those applied to all different agencies? Are they the same ones? Or are those?
I can't answer that because we weren't in there looking at those. We just dealt with our settings.
Okay. So that definition was our definition for our setting. And other agencies within the state could have defined it differently, potentially.
No, HHS is the one that defined it for them too.
Okay.
It's their plan for all settings.
So HHS came up with that list that included.
Y'all's input.
With input from us as far as what we.
And input from these other agencies, other organizations too.
But they're so small. I think, Kelly, they're already done, right?
The adult day health cares, there's 81 in the state that were under contract at the time, and they are all completed as far as their review, based on to get compliant.
Yeah. Review for heightened scrutiny. They're
All of it, yes, ma'am.
There's 81 of them total.
Right.
So when if you say we're going to review 1 or 2, it doesn't take nearly as long as, our list is really big.
Right. Okay.
Which I guess is a good thing because we have most of the people in community-based settings, which,
Right.
If you want to look at it from a bright side of this conversation, we have a lot of people out in the community. So it's a good thing.
So another key provision of the rule is that each state the regulation includes a transitional process for states to ensure that the requirements are met. The process requires each state to submit to CMS its statewide transition plan, and each state provides to CMS a milestone document. So just a little history of where we've been with the implementation of this process. In 2016, DHHS engaged the public consulting group to develop a review instrument and to complete on-site reviews of the DDSN sponsored settings that are listed here. And those reviews were completed between February and October. using the results from those reviews, the state's definition of settings that have the effect of isolating, so using the results of the reviews and the state's definition of the settings that had the effect of isolating at the time, there were templates created for each provider to use to respond to the findings, and they were expected to respond to the specific findings and document the actions to be taken by the agency to achieve full compliance with the rule. And the providers were asked to submit those to DDSN by October of 2018. All of those compliance plans have been submitted. They've been reviewed by DDSN. We used 2 people to do the reviews and then independently, and then they were jointly discussed for concurrence. The plans that were submitted varied widely in content, completeness, and quality. Some were very well done, and it was evident that the provider had embraced the settings philosophy and they were making strides to or had already achieved full compliance in their settings. The most effective plans incorporated continuous training and systems for monitoring the implementation of key processes. And they incorporated strategies to ascertain participants' experiences as a measure of compliance. Some of the compliance action plans were missing needed templates or supporting information. And the least effective plans kind of utilized a once and done approach, meaning that they would train at the time of orientation and never go back to the topic. They didn't have continuous monitoring of key processes that are necessary for compliance. Or they relied heavily on checklists, handbooks, and calendars or other documentation arrangement tools as kind of their sole source of proof of compliance. The rule is really more about the participant's experience versus proof of compliance. So where do we go from here? DDSN is going to respond to each provider regarding their compliance action plan. We'll develop, each plan will be discussed with the provider, and we'll have a compliance action plan. We'll talk to them about what we think needs to happen or what the shortcomings or ways to improve their compliance action plan. Will be available to assist providers as they update their compliance action plans, especially if the provider has a setting that might now be considered isolating or on the grounds of or adjacent to an institution, and they didn't submit one of those before. We will update our internal policies and procedures. We'll help providers update their internal policies and procedures as a basis for compliance when it's needed. And we'll help the provider structure ongoing internal mentoring and monitoring to ensure the requirements become an ingrained and natural part of their service delivery versus kind of once and done. If the provider doesn't have any settings that are presumed to have institutional qualities, if the provider doesn't have any of those currently 127 settings, when the compliance action plan is thorough and complete, DDSN will consider it accepted, which is just kind of a term. And from that point, the provider will just be expected to maintain their compliance. So those providers would be done. So in the presentation a few minutes ago, I mentioned the milestone document. One of the milestones in the statewide transition plan for South Carolina is that 25% of the state's residential settings will be fully compliant by June 30th, 2019, which is about 6 weeks from now. And we are confident we'll meet that. We think we already have 308 settings that are fully compliant and will not need any additional intervention or actions. We're currently determining which residential settings will be fully compliant by then, but we're confident we'll make it. And then we'll track residential and non-residential settings to ensure we're compliant with additional milestones. So the 25% milestone is the first, then it moves to 50, 75, and 100 throughout the statewide transition plan's milestone document. So we want to make sure that we keep a finger on that and make sure we know where we're going. So the March 22nd, 2019 guidance issued by CMS has been mentioned. The guidance did include clarification of the factors that CMS will consider when they are determining a setting that has the effect of isolating. So because of that guidance, we did reevaluate, or we didn't, the criteria of settings that have the effect of isolating was reevaluated. And it allows, this additional guidance also allows for states to avoid having a determination made by CMS when the state determines that a setting that may have the effect of isolating can be fully compliant by July 1, 2020. So there are 117 settings currently identified as settings that may have the effect of isolating. Any of those settings that the state can say we are fully compliant will not need to have a determination made by CMS. So we're hoping that most, if not all, of the 117 settings will not even go to CMS. So there are some settings that cannot avoid having a review, a heightened scrutiny review by CMS. Again, not a bad thing. We think they're compliant. The 10 settings that are on the grounds of or adjacent to a public institution will have to go to CMS for review. And any of the settings, any of the 117 settings that may have the effect of isolating, if they cannot be compliant by July 1, 2020, they will have to go for a determination by CMS. So that's unfortunate, but when a heightened scrutiny review is required for a setting, DDSN intends to work closely with the provider to collect a package of evidence to support that the setting does not have the effect of isolating. The evidence will be reviewed by a state review team comprised of DDSN and DHHS staff members, and there will be consultation from a trained panel comprised of representatives from various stakeholder groups. Information about the setting will be shared for public comment and then submitted to CMS. So that's the process.
And if you want to talk about this final rule, what it really is, and why some providers kind of got it, I think they thought about it for a very long time. Because I was one of the providers that actually visited people in Washington to tell them, hey, how much is this going to cost? And two, why aren't you grandfathering buildings that have already been there for 30 years? You can't just put new rules on these things. Started thinking about it. When you try to legislate what this is trying to do, and this is all about hearts and minds, how the staff and how the management of the provider organizations folks are living and working with them. This is about hearts and minds, folks. That's what this is. It's very hard to legislate hearts and minds. So when we see CAP plans that talk about orientation training and going out, maybe using their unannounced visits to start talking to staff about people can make choices, and having training for individuals with disabilities on learning how to make choices in their lives, when many times choices have always been made for them. So it is about that ongoing, as new staff comes in, and keep that permeating through the agency from the top to the bottom. Like, we get it. Our folks have every right to be part of this community, to do the things they want to do that they find important. It's not really about the locked fence. It's just a physical, an easy, let's look at this, it's a locked fence, it's mitigated, we move on. That's not even a difficult issue. The more difficult issue is grabbing that third shift staff on the weekends, who I used to be, to question, why am I waking people up at 6 o'clock in the morning to give them breakfast on a Saturday morning? Because it's always been done that way. And first shift doesn't want to do your dishes. I mean, literally, that's exactly what happened to me. I asked the question, why can't they sleep in? And you would have thought I asked for the cure for cancer. And it wasn't. It was just, how do you think about the folks that you're working with? Can they have a normal Saturday like the rest of us have? We want to sleep. Well, I don't get to sleep in anyway, but you could sleep in. Some people do sleep in. And allowing that. And maybe somebody else does have to do the dishes. But when you're in that regimented state of mind that you have to do this, this, and this, and you've got a checklist of things to get done, that thoughtful process of these folks are just folks like everybody else and have wants and desires and wishes. You know, they should have that opportunity, and at the very least learn how to be safe to make those decisions in their lives, to make some choices in their lives. That's the big deal, and that's really what this is about. I mean, it's very legalistic, and but when it boils down to it, it is about hearts and minds. So when you read the CAP plan of folks that understand it, it is chock full of that. Top down, bottom up, back and forth. Let's have these discussions. Let's make sure people get trained. Make sure they understand that the person's life comes before these pieces of paper. Those are the folks that got it. And those plans went through. When they stuck to only policy and procedure and it was a one-time thing, then you start thinking maybe they don't quite understand what the heart of the matter is. And they're not difficult to write once you get that thought process in there. So that's what we're working on. If we will be happy to submit the list of 117 places to you. We'd be happy to give you the criteria, and if this commission wants to say stop, that is your prerogative. You are the governing body. But this is not something this has evolved over so much time. I couldn't tell you when the stop and start point would have been to say, let's bring this to you. This has been discussing going on before I got here, as far as that give and take. Let's wait for guidance on this. Let's wait for guidance on that. Watch things change. It's so, all I want is guidance as to where in this process. I say we've got some stuff we want to recommend, but it wasn't a recommendation. It was a discussion. We'd hear something. We'd say, but what did you think of this? So it's like, do we stop at the table in the discussion and say we're going to have to bring this to the commission, which I will do if that's the direction? Or do we wait till we have some sort of workable something to bring to you, like this is, and say, what do you think of this? I mean, I'm just looking for direction. I'd be happy to do anything you want. I don't have a problem with that, but it's just, when you're doing things like this that are evolving over time, it is very hard to stop and start.
I have substantive questions still, not about the process. About the standards.
Are you saying that hearts and minds is not a substance? No, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying.
That's really what it is.
I'm not talking right now about whether the commission got to weigh in on it or not. I just substantively, I wanted to know, and I'm the one that asked to have this on the agenda.
That's right. No, then you have a lot of questions about it. That's good.
And I appreciate that. I thought that was an excellent presentation that really brought me up to speed on a number of things I was not up to speed on. The reason I had asked Mary about having a presentation on this is I wanted to know in what way did our state respond to the March 2019 guidance, because as I understand it, the purpose of the guidance was to kind of take a step back and loosen up a little bit because there had been so much rejection of the standard, the settings rule as released in 2014. So in what way did we respond and loosen up a little bit too?
So I think that over the course of the implementation of this, the early response to the rule in the state, based on everything that the state was hearing from CMS, was that if you had properties that were co-located, meaning they were sitting side by side, that was a property that may have the effect of isolating. And that's why we were at 900. The state sought additional guidance from CMS and the information that's available through their quality contractors. And the co-located or two side by side went to 3 or more co-located properties. The March 22nd guidance kind of said throw away, and it literally said replace any guidance that we've given you before on the characteristics of settings that may have the effect of isolating, and they issued new guidance around that. So the state, under the direction of HHS, considered that And we considered how we could go from 3 or more to what might be a better way, versus, just because you have 3 properties that are sitting side by side or shared property line doesn't necessarily make it. But it allowed us to look at it in a different way. The other thing that was big from the March 22nd guidance is that settings that may have the effect of isolating do not have to be reviewed by CMS or heightened scrutiny if the state determines that they are compliant by July 1, 2020.
Well, and that was exactly
That's
my other
huge.
question. That is huge. I absolutely agree, and I think the federal administration took a huge step in the right direction with this March 2019 guidance. So again, I wanted to make sure that we were fully responding to the additional leeway that we've been given. What, in our estimation or our definition as a state, what does it take to be fully compliant by July 2020? What does that mean to be fully compliant?
So right now, the state is, I'm sorry?
Does that mean no locked fence? If that was at one time our definition of what was
No,
presumed
if the
isolating.
locked fence is necessary for the protection of people.
That stays.
It stays.
Well, no, I knew it would stay under heightened scrutiny because it would pass heightened scrutiny.
Right, and it would pass a state review.
And it would pass the state review.
So what does fully compliant mean?
So what we're talking about is that the state will have from the provider a compliance action plan that is complete and thorough. And then we will use other data, such as the contractual compliance reviews that are annually done on providers, and there are residential and day observations that are done as part of that contract compliance review. And so that kind of data will go to support that the setting is fully compliant.
I guess the part I'm still missing, and I don't want to belabor this because I know we need to go on, but compliant with what standards?
The settings, the things that I've listed in this presentation.
The South Carolina definition?
No, all of them. Going back to the beginning.
What the rule says.
Yeah, what the rule says.
Well, that's what I want to know. Do they
The
have
whole
to show
setting.
compliance with the federal rule or with how South Carolina defined it?
No, the rule starts with all settings having the qualities that the setting is integrated, supports full access to the community, is selected among other settings. The person has the rights of privacy, dignity, and respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. That the setting optimizes autonomy and independence in making life choices, and the facility facilitates choice regarding services and supports that it provides them. So those are the kinds of issues that we'll be looking for.
So in other words,
That show compliance with.
That would show compliance with.
right, so if the CAP plan plus the data from the actual review shows that those provisions are being met,
The state would say,
then that's out. It's out of heightened scrutiny.
we would, if
You
they're
would say.
compliant by July 1, 2020, then they don't go through the heightened scrutiny process. They would not be submitted to CMS. For those that have the effect of isolating, those that are adjacent to an ICF, we don't have a choice.
Right, I don't know.
And then, again, we are talking specifically about settings, so these protections would also, or these conditions would also have to be met.
And we will have to review them annually to make sure this is ongoing. So it's going to have to be part of our compliance plan for over the long haul. I mean, 10 years from now, they still have to be able to meet those standards. So again, that's why the orientation, the new staff and everything still has to be.
A quick question. On the 117, do you know how many of those have to do with a fence?
2 or 3.
Okay. So the rest of them are location?
Correct.
Okay. So, and the process now is that it will be put out for public comment by HHS?
Correct.
And
Statewide transition plan. It'll be made part of the statewide transition plan that is for public comment.
but the specifics of final rule will not, of the state list will not. Here's what
That criteria is in the statewide transition plan. Will be. when it's released for public comment.
Uh-huh.
I think that answers your question.
When it's released for public comment, prior to being submitted to CMS, is there some way that we can make sure it's on our website so that our providers get an opportunity to comment?
Yes.
Or a link to it so that they are encouraged to comment? And how many providers were involved in these conversations with HHS?
I don't know that any were.
They were not, but we did hold work group sessions prior to help people work on CAP plans to get them to have these discussions with other folks. So we had, what do we hold? We had three sessions, 3 work group sessions where I think we were just missing maybe 5 or 6 providers, but everybody was here and had input and we discussed all these items.
So circling
and their
back
concerns.
to the process problem that I abstained on earlier, because we need to be nimble enough to stop something or accelerate something. Maybe we should also look at this process. At what point do we want to know this, other than Lori asking it be put on the agenda in March? If there's an ongoing conversation about it, at what point do we want staff to bring it to us? And how and when do we want to weigh in on that? So if we're going to do a process, let's do it for all of that.
And it's tough because, again, if you have these sort of casual, ongoing conversations, I'm not going to say maybe not casual, but you have these ongoing conversations. It's not that at one point in time we said, okay, these are the 8, when I say we, DDSN said these are our 8 recommendations. That didn't happen, but at some point in time there was back and forth between staff and DHHS where something was suggested.
Well, this is kind of a major shift.
Yeah.
That's like Lori said, that CMS made.
Right.
And then the state is coming up with its thing, and, you know, on the new changes, providers haven't weighed in, commission hasn't weighed in. So earlier on, somehow we have to figure out a way to develop a process so that we have that capability.
Yeah, I agree.
There has been public input sessions going back to 2014. I know as part of 3 of them myself attending. So they've been out there. They've been out. The HHK can't do anything without a public input, and they went around the state and did this.
But not since the shift. Not since the backing up.
There is a monthly work group meeting that
Involves the whole group.
all stakeholders.
Yes,
from places like the Developmental Disabilities Agency to the ADA, Adult Day Healthcare Centers to providers, and that's been ongoing probably since 2014.
It's been, because I was part of it in 2014, so it's the first Thursday of the month, and it's been going on since this rule was introduced.
So I think we go ahead then and make sure that the providers can link in on that. I don't know.
They get invitations.
To what extent there's been participation since CMS made this change. That's all.
Treat it in the form of a motion.
No. I mean, I don't think, unless there's objection, we just can do it.
Is there any problem with that, Steph? Just making sure that that's-
Well, I think I'm trying to, well, I know that it's been public for quite some time, so if providers can, it's an issue of leading the horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Sure.
There's plenty of opportunity to be inputting in this.
We just need
But
to make sure the water's easy.
I think that at some point, what we're going to have to say when we start to engage in these conversations, we'll just come and get permission to engage in the conversation. And then give you updates on them as we go along, because I can't give you a stop and start point. But at least you know we're in there doing it.
Right, I think that's what, at least I'm asking for.
Yeah, I think that's probably for now.
Yeah, is at some point in time say, hey, this is what the conversation has been. Is that what you as a commissioner wanting us to, is this the direction that we're going in? Is it the right
some
direction?
clear direction.
I understand, it's hard.
There are public input sessions scheduled by HHS for June, and I think, if my memory serves, that invitation has gone out statewide to, including to our providers, but that was sent by.
I'd just like to see that extra link on our website, because it's very pertinent to most of the programs, and the consumers operate under the auspices of DDSN. So we need it on our website where people go normally to look to see if there's anything up for comment. And I think, the 3 providers that wanted to talk in March need to just go ahead and try to come to the next meeting and talk, because there are still concerns. So, and I think it's not that simple. It's not, it's when you hear their point of view, there's a difference between what we say and what they hear sometimes. And, we just need to make sure that we don't take any risks in this transition that are unnecessary because we're not communicating clearly. So if there is a concern out there from a provider that, oh, this happened and we don't want to do this, then we need to hear from that person. Thank you. That's all I can say.
All right. Janet, thank you. Appreciate you being the target for this. No, that was not fun.
Tip of the spear, Janet.
Tip of the spear. There you go. Okay. All right. As we go forward to the rest of the agenda, since we spent a long period of time on that, I'm just going to ask that everybody get to the meat of their presentation on the remainder of the agenda as quickly as possible. And as a commission, we'll try to stay also on point. So, with that being said, no pressure. Rufus, early intervention update.
I only have 25 slides, so.
Great. Thank you for culling that down from the 250.
Was editing,
In
right?
the interest of brevity, I just want to update you on the transition to a fee-for-service for early intervention. As you all know, right now we have a hybrid payment system for early intervention. DDSN reimburses DSN boards prospectively through a monthly grant to cover personnel costs. Excuse me. And we pay our private providers retrospectively. And so beginning July, we want to implement consistency and pay retrospectively at a rate of $23.52 per 15-minute unit.
Okay.
And we've engaged providers for months, surveilling productivity. It's a very good opportunity for a lot of providers to earn in excess of what we currently pay. Private providers, which make up 77% of the deliverer of early intervention, have been paid retrospectively, for years, and their workforce is double DSM boards.
And remember, HHS has got BabyNet now. So they have all, we have got our providers direct enrolled. And so they are direct billing starting July 1 to HHS for services, for EI services for BabyNet children 0 to 3. And then we're taking on, they're direct billing to us for the 3 to 6 year olds who are receiving EI services.
And as of last week, about more than half of the current providers have enrolled with Health and Human Services, so that's a good sign. Still some work to be done. To this date, we've only heard from one provider, DSM board, that says, I would like to terminate this service, and that's Pickens. And they only serve 6 children.
Mm-hmm.
They have a good transition plan to transition to agencies operating in Pickens County, which there's more than 4 agencies right now.
Okay.
So in terms of continuity of services, we don't anticipate any disruption. Joyce, our director of early intervention, has been doing this for decades. She has families and children at her heart. We do as well. And so we're going to make sure that we work with every provider, irrespective of whether they're a board or a qualified provider, to make sure there's no loss in service.
Any questions from anyone on the commission with regard to this? Is staff asking for us to make any ratification of any decisions that you've made at this point in time?
Moving ahead on July 1, if you would like to ratify that date.
Just for the record.
I would entertain a motion then to approve the July 1 implementation date of the fee-for-service retroactive payment across the board.
So moved.
You have a second.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Financially, the rest of them, other than Pickens, are at the break even. They're going to break it.
Not all are at the break even, but all feel that they could. Through Joyce's technical assistance, which she's been to, I think, 12 providers, and she's going to 2 more next week. We're seeing where, because we paid prospectively, there were some opportunities missed in terms of visits not being made up. So there's some missed opportunities for some of those providers that come July, they'll realize that.
So these targeted case management billing reports we've received, we don't have those reports for early intervention?
Yeah, we send out monthly reports to providers.
No, but.
Commission.
Yeah.
In April, the.
Do you know
percent
what,
of contract-
what is the average or?
In April was 94.2. And so the average is, I think it was 70, 74, around 74. But keep in mind, last July, the percent of billing compared to the contract amount was 69%.
So they're not all whole, but they think they can be by June.
And for providers serving, providers like Pickens, who have very small caseloads,
Yeah.
less than 15, we call those providers personally, and all felt strongly that, hey, we can make this work.
But they haven't yet.
They haven't yet. They haven't been.
Okay, that's all I need to know to vote.
Yeah, because we are paying for a full caseload when we only have 3 children being served in some counties. So it
Covering the
is,
personnel costs.
yeah, they've got to get into marketing their service because just because you're the board doesn't mean people are going to come to you. You're going to have to let them know you're there and fight for those kids because the competition there's a lot of competition out there. Plenty of providers.
That's on that point. For 77%, folks who receive a retrospective payment to make it work. To work.
Okay. All right. Without any further discussion, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Ravenel, are you still there? Have you had to leave?
I just said aye.
Okay. Sorry, it's not coming through.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Any opposed?
Me.
Okay.
I'd like a roll call vote, or at least that recorded in the meeting minutes.
There'll be recorded that there were 4 ayes and 1 nay from Commissioner Ravenel. Commissioner Thompson, I'm sorry.
But thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rufus. All right, and if you could, Rufus, while you're up, can I get somebody to hit this?
He doesn't know how.
Yeah, hit the button, hang it up.
Oh,
Thank you. Okay. Next item up is a waiver case management update from Susan.
Good afternoon. I'll provide an update for you all on the progress with implementation of waiver case management. I know you've received regular updates over the past year. And we have been, just to let you know, we have been engaged with the Department of Health and Human Services with formal project management as well as DDSN project management regarding this implementation. So I'll just present very few slides and then we'll get into some of the data, and I'm going to do a little handoff with Pat because he can get into some of the break-even analysis questions that you may have associated with that. So because it is a waiver service, waiver case management implementation dates are decided by the Department of Health and Human Services. Waiver case management, just as a quick summary, there are many more details I could spend time going through, but it will entail monthly case management contact, quarterly face-to-face contact, face-to-face in-home contact once every 6 months, and then also allow billing when hospitalized. So some of these components and minimum requirements will actually reflect an additional opportunity for case managers to spend more time providing case management, which then translates to additional units, which then of course translate to additional billing. So there is a definite opportunity with the implementation of the minimum requirements to see some growth in itself from where we are now with Medicaid targeted case management provided to individuals in the waiver. So in order to obtain stakeholder input, the draft waiver case management standards were distributed for public comment at the end of April. Mary also has a monthly case management work group. In advance of that date, she circulated those to them for initial feedback so that our draft could be even better. And we have, as I said, ongoing, I think my best way to describe it as a working relationship with Department of Health and Human Services. So we're constantly in conversation, trying to understand what their expectations are, trying to reflect back on what provider feedback is. So that's sort of that ongoing work product, intellectual work that we do with them. So ultimately, we know, according to executive limitations policy, that the standards will be reviewed and ultimately approved by the policy committee and then go to the full commission. Necessary changes, of course, we want to know about those, will be forwarded to the Department of Health and Human Services, but ultimately they're the ones who will issue the manual and approve the DDSN standards. So in anticipation of making sure all of these things are moving forward, we're in constant communication and we're developing training so that we can train providers in these changes prior to July 1 implementation date. We're going to be doing some virtual training as well as in-person training. and again, before July 1st. Talking briefly about the rates, I know there will be some conversation about that. We've been sending over the last year plus information to providers on their individual billing performance. We're looking as a system-wide, and we also have provided some individual analysis, so they can look it up, they can study it internally and move forward and see how the rate change will actually affect them. So the rate will change to $100 and $62 as the non-travel rate, and it will be a direct pass-through rate from DHHS to the providers, with it passing through DDSN to them. So according to this analysis that we've been doing, case managers generally have to bill 4 to 5 hours a day on duty to break even. And as I said, Pat will provide some additional details on that, but that really equates to 50 to 66% of their time in a given week. We know it with case management duties that sometimes there's more travel, sometimes they see more cases on a given day. So really looking at it at a week-wise basis, that 50 to 66% of the time seems like a valid number.
Susan, that 4 to 5 hours a day, is PTO, holidays, and sick factored into that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right. And so just kind of, thinking through that a little bit, that's a very good comment to make. With that 4 to 5.2 hours billable a day, we've found through the technical systems that we've provided that there are variations in what that break-even number would be because of factors like I've listed on the slide. Having the ratio of case managers to consumer cases, a working supervisor carrying a caseload would make a big difference, depending on your retirement costs, your health benefits, your overhead costs. All of those things are big factors. So a high-cost structure would have more of those factors with higher costs in play. In order to gear up for the transition, we provide technical assistance. First, we looked at the 12 providers that reported less than 40% billing efficiency in their March data, and then provided an on-site technical assistance to them. So that process was very intensive for staff. We used our case management staff, we used the fiscal staff, and as well as our audit staff to do that work. So as of yesterday, we've been able to visit 9 of those providers. As I believe you may know, that Fairfield DSN board had determined that they would terminate providing case management as of July 1st. They have about 65 cases, and they had some very personnel related situations associated with their 2 case managers to lead up to that decision. We also have been notified that 1 of the qualified providers will terminate or reduce their caseload. We're working with them, and we have a formal kind of transition process. Okay. Additionally, just so you're aware, yes, we've provided specific training on case management, billing, productivity, documentation in fiscal year 19 to 27 providers. So there's a lot of efforts in place. There's a lot of communication. And what we're seeing over time is that our data is improving. Providers have learned a lot about their break-even analysis. They've learned a lot about what they need to do as far as management of personnel and training and communication, and really just that accountability. Specific to the providers that I was just mentioning, kind of that 12, we've prepared this chart for you, which shows the data from March 2019 compared to that of April 2019. So overall, if you look along the bottom, the average has changed from 31.8% to 42.4% when we're looking at their market rate revenue compared to the band payment. So just in 1 month, you can see that's a good change. It's going upward. If you look just column to column, you see that growth varies by provider. There were a couple that actually fluctuated a little bit downward. So we're still seeing some ups and downs provider by provider, but overall we're seeing some very positive changes. We've also included, just for your perspective, the provider size, because we know the caseload numbers, kind of the location, all of those things factor into all of the variables that affect these percentages. So Pat is going to talk next about some overall trends we're seeing with the system and more financial information. Yeah. So that right there is the chart.
number 8.
All right. I'm gonna walk around a little bit because this is not suitable to just a static questions are encouraged, because this is not an easy area to get your arms around, because you guys are gonna be expected to make decisions. I really think give that maybe a little better than the 5 minutes that Gary's given.
Take whatever time you need,
The purpose of
Pat.
this chart is just to give you a frame of reference to generate discussion. And so I'll describe the chart. When this started in April of last year, when I don't want to go into too much history, when the market rates were reintroduced, they've been introduced in 2014, but it was reintroduced and said, we are going to go to market rates. Market rates, $100 an hour face-to-face, $60 in the office.
Who introduced that? Was it DHHS? Who introduced it when you said they?
HHS. They provided the rates to us. And prior to that, our rates were $162 an hour face-to-face and $156 an hour in the office.
But that's not what the providers get paid.
And HHS in 2014 made the determination that that was just an unreasonably high rate for case management. And so they reduced it to a market rate. And the market rate is what we said. And
it was a reduction, it was also going to a 15-minute unit versus a monthly unit, because HHS felt that the other things were being done in that month's time that were not something they should have been paying for. So they wanted it only for the items that a case manager should be billing for.
so to start the story, you have to know a little bit of background how the bands work. We give the providers $139 per month up front per waiver consumer.
Dangerous.
And then they do billing work and they turn in their bills. We take the bills, turn them into HHS. They pay us $162 or $156 an hour. You would think that would be rolling in money. Well, in April of 18, we were losing about $3 million a year. And the reason for that is the provider community was billing roughly at less than 2 hours a day or on-duty time for case management. Meaning we were paying them for the full day, they weren't billing the full day. So their low billings, even though we had a high rate, resulted in low revenue, less than what we were paying them in advance. So HHS came in and said, look, we're going to it. Our analysis shows that you're providing services to consumers 6 hours a year?
6 hours a year.
6 hours a year. We're paying you $139 a month. So we're paying you over $1,600 for 6 hours a year. You're going to go to fee for service, like we decided back in 14, and let's start. And it was not a deliberative process. It was just picking up a decision that had already been made in 2014 and stopped, and now it's being restarted.
The reason it was restarted is because CMS finally got around to approving the state plan amendment that was set down there in 2014 in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I gave you the line at the month before April 18th, March, it would be under this line. It was about 30, if we converted their billing activity into revenue using market rates, they would have been about 31% of the band payment. So and the purpose of this is to show how far they've come in 14 months. And this right here, the very first month that we measured, which is May of 18, the average billing rate was, the average rate compared to the band was 39%. And then for 8 or 9 months, we moved it to 50%. It was inching up, but it wasn't going anywhere near where it should be going. And then we got from June to April, and now April, we're at 63.8%. Okay, now the question is, what does 63.8% mean?
Right.
Okay, here's the bad news. Bad news is, every month, the system-wide band payment is $1.6 million. 63.8% of that means is, if we convert it to billing today, there'd only be $1 million in the system, and providers would have revenue losses of $600,000. That's for real.
Right.
And that,
Which equates to how many million a year?
600, now it has to be 600, it's
7 million?
600,000 times 12, 7.2. The difference is it all goes back to the market rate. The bands could only be sustained because we had these crazy high rates. Okay, they're taking these rates down, they're saying, look, you gotta go to market rates. We talked to the actuaries, we did our analysis for providers in 14. These are the rates. We think these are fair rates. These rates require a provider, a case manager, to work on average 4 to 5 hours a day when they're on duty. And that factors in annual leave, sick leave, and holidays.
When before they were working how many hours a month, did you say?
I would say,
Or billing?
taking the very first billing rate, it would be less, probably 2 hours a day. They're working 8 hours, they're only billing 2 hours. So now the question is, are they not doing the job? Or are they not billing the job? And I think the answer is probably they're doing something 8 hours a day. They're probably not billing efficiently. But also, I think you'll see the next slide is, in the Medicaid world that we're in, if they pay for a service, they want us to provide the service.
Right.
Meaning you can't redirect something that may be for the best interest of a consumer. They want you to get back on target and say, stick on case management. So it's not that they're not doing it, they're just drifting the areas that are not billable.
And when you only have you're getting paid on a monthly basis, documentation, you just make sure you get something in there that month. You might not be picking up all the documentation that you should be doing because I did a billable activity this month, there you go. And if you've been a case manager around a long time, that's how it was done, because I used to do this in 94. And you made sure you had your billable activity for that month, but if you were doing something else, you might not document it unless you were building a bigger case for something. But I think that it's more of a documentation issue at this point.
So let me get another time, is what does this number mean from a bottom line? Am I winning or losing? Am I making money or am I losing money? If you look at this line, again, we don't have perfect information because what we get from the providers on their break-even standpoint, it's okay information, and through conversations, my estimation is, and this is what you have to understand about our provider network, is if we have 45 providers out there, they have different overhead structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I'm on this end of the spectrum, I'm a new provider, I got a young staff, they're less paid.
Right.
I may not have state benefits, and they only get 2 weeks off a year. And they all have laptops and they work out of their house.
Right.
Okay, they have low overhead.
Okay.
In our system, because of the boards and the success of the boards and the stability of the boards have senior people in case management job, higher salaries,
Right.
Higher benefits. A lot of them have the state retirement, health insurance, leave policies, and you might have a secretary in there too. They have a higher structure. So people with different structures are being required to fold into a single rate. And that's a challenge, because if you have a low overhead board, Susan, I just messed up. If I have a low overhead board, I might be able to get to, no, I'm good.
Okay.
If I have a low overhead board, I might get to 70% of my current band payment and I'll break even. Okay, so now the question is, well, I want to do better than break even. Break even is our first, we got to get to break even. Most of us are governmental operations, we're nonprofits, we got to recover our costs. So 70% will get you there. Now, other boards that are high overhead, you may have to go to 90%. I've seen some need to go to 95%, but that's their overhead structure. And it's a real life situation that we have to account for. So right now, if you looked at the system, these people up here, these guys are probably close to breaking even or getting near breaking even. But the second benchmark we have to worry about is we at least want them to cover their cash flow. You gotta cover your personnel costs, because we're transitioning, and if you can't cover your personnel costs, it's a whole different level of stress. That's about 20% less. So now you're in the range of 60 to 65%. If I get the 60 or 65%, I probably paid for my personnel costs and covered a little bit of my car costs. So where's that at? The average for the system is 63.8. So we're getting in the range of covering our cash flow, but we are not to the point where we are covering our break-even points. Now, break-even points are subjective. People might say, well, I need to get to 95%, and someone else might say, well, if your supervisor worked cases and you didn't have an administrative assistant, and you got your billing up from X to X, so there is that business model in there. So that's what the high end looks like. If you look at the low end here, we went out to those, and I went out to 2 of them myself. They're here not because of the rate. They're here because they're billing between 1 and 2 hours a day. It's a performance issue. And when you go to them, it was like the same people that we talked to last November and December. They had that same look in their face, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? How am I going to organize my caseload?
The things we've been saying for the last.
Those same people that were down here can get up here. We've had providers. We had a provider that was on the bottom of.
A large provider.
We had a large provider who was the worst in the state. And within 3 months, they're in the top quarter in the 70%.
Not even 3 months. It's just been 2 months since we've been out to speak to them.
So it is,
amazing.
and I guess I'll go back to just from my own life experience. This is a cultural shift in case management. Before, I got $139. I had to document every other month. And I could help people all I want to help. Guess what? It created poor billing practices and also created some mission drift. With rates, you will not get paid unless you bill. And the reason they're going to fee for service is to change behavior. We're trying to get people to stay on task and provide services.
And when changes waiver case management's coming in, the new process, you have to have contact monthly. And you have to see the person 4 times a year. And that is to go back and build those relationships, because frankly, 6 hours of case management a year as an average is just very, very low.
And when you look down here where we were in March of 18, which is a little bit below this, the provider community has increased billing units 100%. They've doubled their billing. And then the question is, well, what happened there? Why didn't they do that before? They probably, there's certainly no doubt, their billing efficiency, meaning things that they did in the past they didn't bill for, they're billing. But I also strongly argue that the fee for service is making us provide services at a higher level. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have to do it, people are staying focused on target and they're providing more services. So this isn't just billings, that's services. So services has gone up and we haven't given them a dime more.
We've also provided them the new waiver case management draft manual, so they can see what is actually required in this new service. And we have been asking them for a year to please, every month, make contact so you start getting used to the new way. And some did not do that.
And I will jump ahead here, and this is probably, as we go forward, and the plan that we have rolled out, the plan that is, we've been waiting for this meeting so that we can finalize everything, because we certainly want to have the support of the commission.
We've been doing this for quite some time. And the community, the provider community has been working in work groups since the beginning of the year.
Let's talk about the safety net plan.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The safety net plan, because we got to make this transition without destabilizing the system. And so the strategy that we've come up with is at 60%, 60% will get most providers at or near their cash flow. It might even be closer to 65%, but it is a number. And we selected 60% because back in February, the numbers were low. Because there's a cost to us to supplement. And the plan would be, starting in July, August, and September, when we go to a fee-for-service model, that we will pay everybody a prospective payment at the beginning of the month of 60% of the grant rate. And the purpose of that would be that 60% would approximate at least their personnel costs, to give the low end confidence that I'm not going to crash. and give them time to get where everybody else is. And then if you bill more than 60%, these guys up here, at the end of the month, will write you a check. And what that does is it incentivizes productivity and providing services, because you will get to earn what you do. But yet, if you're below 60%, we're protecting these people from getting nervous about the developmental time to get up there. At 60%, that will cost us $150,000 a month, which is cheap to maintain stability in the system. So if we supplement these group $150,000 for 3 months, they're going to cover the personnel costs while they climb the scale. And if we get to, that's still, you heard me talk about the financial situation we're in, it's well worth the money to spend $450,000 to give them that more latitude.
That's the beginning of our fiscal year, we don't have a hint.
So that's the
But
strategy.
it's not permanent.
Not 3 months.
Because we don't want to get back into the same rhythm we got back in 2014, stop and start and stop and start, and where everybody loses attention, and you don't have the attention on the subject matter. So,
We want to incentivize proper behavior, services, fee for service, accountability, but we want to have a floor to help development. And what we have seen, development can take place within 2 or 3 months if everybody is swinging. Once everybody gets over the anxiety of, I actually have to bill 4 to 5 hours a day. This last chart here I'm going to show you, and it's worth taking a few minutes. This is basically all 45 providers from the highest biller to the lowest biller. These quadrants are based on consumers served. And if you notice it, see how they're going, they get larger? But the bigger providers are doing better. They're just doing better than the smaller providers. There's a correlation. And the second thing I want to bring your eye to is the providers in yellow. There's 9 of them. They are the providers that their sole mission is case management. The other 36 providers are generally boards, and they provide all services to include case management, meaning they have revenue streams for a variety of things. These 9 have one revenue stream, case management. So their success and failure is going to be contingent upon their billing capabilities. These 6 here are all at 64.5% or greater. These 3 here, this person is a sole practitioner who does case management part-time. And we spoke to this person, and she has every intention to stay in the game because she has other revenue streams. This right here, these 19 consumers generate $30,000 a year revenue. At billing, she'll generate $15,000 billing here for herself. And she works by herself, so I think her overhead's a lot lower than everybody else. It's not affecting her because she has a unique cost structure. This one here is an out-of-state large provider who's come into the state in order to do business. And they have a small foothold with 52 cases in 32 counties. So by their very nature, it's inefficient. They don't care. They're capitalized. They're waiting to get into the market. They're sitting on the edge of the pool, and they will fill our gaps. Not all of them. All I'm saying is they're happy where they're at. This provider, and I want to bring your eye to it because it really shows you the dysfunction of the bands. This provider here, 2.7% billing capacity, 86 consumer cases, 1 person. This person here, these 86 cases generate $12,000 a month. Mm-hmm. You know what they billed in April? $327. So if you looked on the sheet, you say, my God, if that person loses the band, they're only going to have $325. This person here is abusing the system. Right. Okay, and here's our anomaly. But my point is, the system allows inefficiency in the system to live, and fee-for-service is going to squeeze that out. That sounds cold and hard, but that's what HHS is asking us to do. I believe it's a stiff rate. I mean, and the providers have doubled their capacity, and they still have not crossed the finish line as far as feeling like I've recovered my costs. I believe they will, given time, because I've seen people go up there. I just want to get them to a cash flow situation where they can cover their personnel costs, cover the variable costs, and then grow into this.
Pat,
Go ahead.
on the trajectory that you're using with percents, which is iffy to be useful as a trajectory, because in March, there was a very small provider who went from like 80-something% to 119%, and that changed the average of the percentages, but I don't know that it changed that bottom dollar cash. So you said in April, there was a $600,000 difference, less that they would be making or getting. What was the bottom line number in April?
The bottom line,
Of the difference in what they've been getting and what they would be getting?
a band would pay them 1.6. If you use market rates, it would pay them $1 million.
No, I understand what that is for April, because I asked for that. I'm asking you for March.
It would have been larger because it was down at 60%. So the gap would be.
So what I'm saying, no, yeah, I know.
3.8, it would be another.
It may be, but some providers actually billed a better percent and made less money. And that could have to do with face-to-face contacts. It could have to do with other things. But using just percentages and not using dollars is a dangerous thing to base this transition on.
Believe me, there are the precision of the numbers. And I agree, there's anomalies in there. Anomalies, but it's just when you spread, I guess the best way I look at it is people have the same rate, but they have different overhead structures.
Right, I understand that, and I understand they have different expenses and whatnot. Can you tell us how many people, how many vacancies during this transition process have occurred in case management? How many people have resigned, retired, been laid off?
Been laid off.
I don't know that. See, also, I think there's some misnumbers in here. You could be
Why
down
don't
here.
we keep up with that? Why would we, in a transitioning out from a payment system, why would we not want to know what the manpower situation has decreased? Why would we not want to have that information? Because here's the premise that you're going under. We've got a bunch of providers out there that are slow to getting into this deal. My position on it is a little bit different. When the providers agreed to this rate in 2014, they were making $113 thereabouts for case management. We have continued to get them up to $139. So here we are in 2019. You have a whole bunch of a different, competitive market base. Salaries are going up, competition is higher, and you're still dealing off a rate that was decided when?
2014.
Right, and we're still operating off that same rate.
Well, that's a great question.
I'm sorry, but the items that were used in that rate are, if I were to go back and retool that rate, we would be at the same thing, if not lower, because they used a $50,000 salary, and our salaries aren't touching it. The second thing here is that we've got people, the flip side of that vacancy thing is you have a vacant caseload, they're doing the bare minimum, and we're still paying $138 a case per month.
Let's talk about the 2% thing. State employees are going to get a 2% raise?
This is a pass-through rate, they're not getting that.
Case managers are not going to get that.
Well, it's in the rate, because
How's
unless
it
you go
rate if
back
we
and
did the
redo-
rate years ago?
Because the rate was $50,000. We do not, for salary, that's before benefits, and a 27% benefit package plus training and supervision. So if you go back now and you pull that all out again and add 2% to our current salaries, it's still not going to come up to $50,000.
I really want that crystal ball they used to detect that.
They were being generous in the day. We didn't
Well,
have anybody making that kind of money.
it's hard for me to see generous when I don't see anybody breaking even.
Let me jump on that right there. And these individuals, their whole revenue is case management, and they're all here. Down here are people that have multiple revenue streams. And I think they're at different levels of development. And some people got in it early, got up here, some people didn't. Some people may never get in it. Let's face the reality, some people may never turn the corner. They don't have whatever it takes the management, whatever it takes, may not turn the corner. You look at me funny because it's.
I'm looking at you funny because the premise is that they can't do this. And my thing is, really, for all these years that case management has been in place, then, you know, we have provided, the case managers have provided a very useful service. And that includes things like transportation. And they can do this, but not without other things in place that they are doing that are not billable. So relationships have to be established with Senior Solutions and with the Medicaid transportation agencies, and those things take time. And you handed them, you know, March, it's going to be July 1st. I know not you, HHS, but whoever, March to, you know, you got these few months. I'm just saying, and then you've got to negotiate your way. You've got to find somebody that's going to do these other valuable services. Just because they're not billable, that doesn't make them less valuable. And just because the managers of these programs decide that they still want to offer those services and they don't have an alternative, that doesn't make them slow-witted. It just means that they are trying to provide the same service they've been providing. Now, we said we didn't even ask them for a plan. There was no roadmap. We still don't have one. A plan to make this transition in an orderly way where we can say, okay, if it crashes July 1 and the trajectory changes based on percentages that don't reflect anyway, because only the bottom line cash reflects it. If it does, then we need to say our service delivery system is at risk. That is like having a fatality, a number of them at an intersection, and then putting up a stoplight. Why can we not see that if nobody's breaking even, we're already there? We're in jeopardy.
I can put it this way, I don't disagree with some of those concepts. I just try to deal with we are just trying to deal with the pieces on the battlefield.
But we have, one, this is not something that started in March. Our meeting started in February. Our discussions with providers started long before that. They have been, for the last 5 years, trying to come up and quantify those things they do that are so good for people that they can't bill for. And they have not been able to articulate that. I was on the team. I was fighting it too, saying, oh, we do all this stuff. What do we do? Transportation has never been billable. I was a case manager in 1994. It was not billable then. It is not billable now. But hooking somebody up with transportation, quite billable. So if you want to build a relationship with the senior center or the Medicaid agency, all of that is billable. All of this is billable. This is a matter of changing a culture where I got paid on a monthly basis, whether I did or did not do something. And frankly, given our financial situation, $5 million were left on the floor last month of billable months, 36,000 months that were not billed for and that we paid out there for.
I just think when you announce in March and tell them July 1st.
I did not announce in March, ma'am. I'm sorry. I have to disagree with that.
When, you know, that's when we heard about it.
The history is May of 18. We were under the impression we were going to start in July of 18.
That's right.
And every 3 months for the last year, we were in fear that it was going to start. And at some point around this beginning of the year, that was the date.
It's like new fiscal year. Let's do the new fiscal year, and we'll get them up to speed by then.
The other element on that May date, though, was somebody else had that date as when we were supposed to be starting. We've got a liability that builds up
every month
when we don't implement it, right? Where they can come back and say, theoretically, well, I mean, but it's not a theoretical, it's a liability. It's a liability. It's a question about whether they'll, I mean, there's another responsibility we've got here that we can.
I don't know, Gary, because, you know, if we're getting $7.2 million less for running this service, if April is correct and we're $600,000 minus, so we multiply that by 12 months, where's that $7 million going to go?
That's not what I'm talking about in terms of liability. I'm talking about that for the previous, from July 18 to July 19, they could come back and say, you haven't done what we mandated and therefore you owe us money back.
We'd have to first manage to do a cost report.
Look, there's 1,000 problems with it that could, and you know, and I know they can come back years later.
You don't do a cost report, then you don't.
We're dealing with that.
Mayor Thompson, I hear every word you say. I am, the only exception I have with the analysis is we are getting ready for July 1st.
I don't know.
That's going to happen. That is not a DDSN decision, it is a HHS decision. Now, HHS has heard all the arguments of the rate. They have decided the rate, they have determined that 4 to 5 hours a day for the days you work is a fair rate. Now, we have to get there. Now, and we are moving that way, but the game is gonna start on July 1st, and I think.
A month and a half with nobody breaking even today, we're gonna have it. It's gonna be there.
Well, let me answer.
60%.
For some people.
When we asked, so Laura, you still here? I want you to give words, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Okay.
We've been talking to all these people. Who is in, who is out? We have, Fairfield has left the building. They have, I think, 60 cases. These two at the very bottom here, they want to get out, but they want to keep some cases. Okay. I don't know about that. Everybody else, everybody has a sense of, hey, I'm going to make this work. And I'm not running to the door, but at the same time, the real world is, I could be hemorrhaging revenue. And some people can afford it during the developmental phase, some people can't. Lori, what's your feel for the population out there?
Yeah, I think we have, kind of a core group of people who feel like they totally can make it work. They know they have work to do, but they can make it work. We have some private providers who are interested. A lot of people are considering expansion as a way to make it work, because a lot of the problems that people are seeing is they don't have enough billable activities on the cases that they have. So I think we'll see providers expanding into other counties. And then there are the couple that are getting out of it. And then there's a group of people that really want to make it work, but they're concerned. And most of those are boards. And, fortunately, I think boards have capability, other revenue to kind of come along, if that makes sense. So at this point, we only know of 2 that just are going to stop. And one of those is really not about, it's not only about this rate. It's an issue of they have very few cases. They have case managers that are at the end of their career. They've already retired and come back. And almost everybody they serve, they also serve in direct services. And with the looming conflict-free case management coming from the federal government that says you don't get case management and direct services from the same provider, they know that they feel like in a few years they may be in a situation where they only have 5 cases, so it's not kind of worth it.
And with all the uncertainty, what gives me some assurance or some confidence, number one, the trend line gives me confidence, but what gives me I think more of a pragmatic confidence is that safety net program, that right here at 60%, I think that will get people at or near their cash flow for $150,000. If we want to move it to 65%, it'll cost us $190,000 a month. If we want to move it to 70%, it'll cost us $230,000 a month. Once we have that in place.
You got that for 3 months, you said.
But my point is, it's 3 months. But I think the other factor in this whole thing is we cannot fail.
So we're gonna find out in October.
No, wait a second, we cannot fail. And so we're here in.
We are failing.
We're not,
It's.
But we also have the other part, the safety net's twofold.
Right.
The one is that 60%, but the second part is the actual Medicaid billing that goes in. Because we're the ones that are sending it over there. So we're gonna presume all the billing is good, and we're gonna pay for the stuff that comes through. The stuff that comes on the floor, we're gonna work with the provider to mitigate. And then that, and not claw back from them, the ones that do not go through, a wrong Medicaid number, wrong code, wrong something like that, then that group will take 4 months to claw that money back. So they have assurance that we're putting that through for them. And I don't think we're going to take that away. That's something we said we could do indefinitely.
We'll do it indefinitely.
That's not something that's going to end after the first quarter or anything.
We will have an organizational tool. And we can start, we select 60% in February because these guys were way down here. It was going to cost us $400,000 at 60%. Now 60% is going to cost us $150,000. Next month, the money costs us $75,000. The point is, that tool, we can ratchet it up to keep
stability in the system. We're saying 3 months because we want people to be independent. We want people to get there. But if they're not there and we sense weakness in the system, I think our job is to manage the situation.
Right, and we'll manage it situation by situation.
You don't really know, I mean, you don't even know how many people you've lost, so you're not managing the weakness in the system. But I'm not gonna,
It is not an ideal situation. There are uncontrollable factors.
has catastrophe written all over it. Poorly planned, poorly done.
I just respectfully disagree with that.
Any other questions?
Yes. So the major component that you're bringing to us that's a change from the previous updates that we've had is the safety plan that you guys have adapted. Could you summarize that for me in like 3 sentences for purposes of us validating that via motion?
Everybody whose net revenue at the end of the month, at the beginning of every month, we're going to take your current band payment times it 60% and give you that money.
Okay, so the first step of it is a prospective payment of 60% for 3 months.
With the idea that covers your personnel costs.
I don't care about the motive. I want
60%.
60%
We're working the first quarter.
Okay, that's step 1 of the safety plan. Is there a step 2?
1A is if the billing is above it, we will pay for you we'll pay that amount retrospectively at the end of the month.
So they're not just getting the 60%, so we're incentivized.
The anything beyond 60% is retroactively paid at the end of the month.
Right.
That's
And then
step
the second part is that we put forth all billing as if it was good and we mitigate the fallout with the provider and hold for 4 months until it is, before we can claw it back.
Okay, so the quick summary of that is all billing will be submitted and no clawback will be accepted for 4 months.
Right.
Okay. So with those 3 components of the safety plan being defined, would entertain a motion to ratify that. I mean, that decision is one of these ones that I think we should be giving our check off if we're in agreement with it or not as part of the safety
I
plan.
don't want a roll call vote on this.
That's fine. We've got 4 of us. It's not that hard.
Thank
We can identify it. So, okay, so would entertain a motion to ratify that safety plan as proposed by staff.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion of that question? Okay. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Note that plan is ratified by a vote of 3-1 with Commissioner Thompson being vote in opposition.
Or you could just do a roll call vote.
There's no need with 4 people. As a chair, I don't think that's needed. We're saying what it is. There's 4 of us here. You don't have to do a roll. Okay. Any further questions for Pat?
Ultimately, these changes are going to deliver better service to clients, correct? Because they're going to get more care, more help with
contact
with case managers who they need to help them with resources and waivers and living and all the things that they deal with.
Services will get more services. It's already gone up by 100% since we started. Some of that is billing for what they did, some of that is services. But they're at the saturation point. If they're billing as good as they can get, they have room to provide more services.
Okay.
And there'll be monthly contact now, so.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for asking that question.
Well, I'm new, but I know that this is
Right,
just,
and we've had the discussion. We have families that don't even know what services they get.
and I've talked to these families a lot.
Yes, we know.
And yes, I hear that a
Relevant
lot.
fact.
That's a big deal.
I know I get 1 more minute. Part of our analysis is whenever the safety net ends, and we have it for 3 months, and I think we can manage that according to needs. Whenever it does end, there's going to be a 40-day gap from that last prospective payment. Like right now, if it ended in 3 months, we would make that payment beginning of September, and then the October work wouldn't be paid till November 10th. That's a 40-day cash flow window. And we looked at all of the boards we have financial statements from. And we looked at all their cash positions. And the cash positions for all but 3 boards were well more than enough to cover that 40-day flow. So we're going to talk to the 3 boards that have low cash balances where it could be a challenge, and we're going to have to work something out for them when we get to that bridge step.
And then bring that to us,
And then,
get ratified.
and then the QPLs, who are all on the top, we have to contact them, hopefully, given their billing, that they'll be okay.
What is the average, hourly rate that case managers get? Like, people that work for a lot of the different
There's my smart guy.
agencies, groups, boards. I mean, what does case management, what's the going rate per hour for a case manager? A general, I mean, I know there's probably different levels maybe, but.
So prior to, kind of this changeover, there was a minimum salary requirement from DDSN, and I believe it was right around $32,000 a year. When we started planning towards this transition, DDSN took away the minimum salary requirement and basically said to boards, you can pay people however you want to pay them. And I don't know what the salary is.
It's all over the place.
I imagine it's probably about the same.
Yeah, I think in New York, it was between 34 and 35.
A year. Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in the low 30s is kind of the starting. Now, there are case managers who've been in the system for a really long time that make substantially more than that. Just because of, cost of living raises and that kind of thing.
This question is a little bit tangential, but back on the prior chart, you were talking about the diversification of services, that some are providing just case management and others providing a panoply of services. How does that intersect with the principle of conflict-free case management? What is it that case management conflicts with? What other services? And does conflict-free case management apply in waiver case management?
Not right now, because the DHHS hasn't put a date on it till 2024. But it's if you were providing direct services.
Thrive Upstate in Greenville.
They went ahead and did that.
Yeah, they went ahead and did it, right. And what they did, so.
In preparation for that, but.
Right.
In York, we wouldn't do it till I knew what was going on, mainly because of my employees had been there so long that we had people near retirement age. And I just thought it was the wrong thing to do.
So the conflict was
that if you're doing the plan.
the day program.
The day program.
And your case
Or
management.
residential. But the truth of the matter is, in York, we have our day program or the adult enrichment center. They get to choose. I mean, there's not like tons of services to where, I want you to go to my program, because there's not a lot of programs there. And folks for residential go visit wherever they want to go.
It's almost more of a potential it's a potential conflict.
I'll tell you what more of a conflict is being the financial manager of that. The board being the financial manager more so than being the service provider.
But like you said, the day program or residential, is it a conflict, if conflict-free case management were applicable right now, would it be a conflict for a provider to provide supported employment services and case management?
Yes.
Or respite and case
But
management?
possibly not respite, not PCA, not nursing services, some of the in-home supports, it wouldn't be. It's not as clear as one would.
Kind of a differentiation between case management supposed to be considered an indirect service versus direct service, and having those under the same umbrella organization.
Is the conflict?
But at this point.
Because there could be pressure to make certain decisions that weren't in the best
interest of the client.
Person due to a variety of factors.
Okay.
But the fact is, the limited number of placements in residential or day programs, it kind of.
Not much.
That is more of an issue, but the financial part of it, being the financial manager, that could influence it. So I would say that's more of a conflict, but there's plenty of case management organizations. If you choose to go to somebody else, you have plenty of choice in that.
So, but conflict-free case management is not applicable to these services until 2024?
Well, that's what the latest waiver document I saw said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because most of us, if you look, there's not very many just private providers.
Right.
So the boards are still, the hunk of our services are being provided through the boards.
But we have a budget request every year that's supposed to give us transition money for that never gets approved.
Nope.
We've been talking about it a lot, and it's always sort of, hey.
Thank you for getting that.
Very hard. I think we're good. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
When is lunch coming in?
We should do this. Eva's not in charge, Gary's got the meeting.
Hey, no, wait a minute.
Hey, and the bad
Okay.
part, the next three things are the things that
Yep.
she asked to put on this list,
I
and
know.
she's not on the phone
All right,
anymore.
we have an update on hurricane preparedness, Rufus.
Make it quick, Rufus, because we did this last month.
All right, well, one, I want to give praise to Reed Marshall, who is our disaster preparedness coordinator. And he has done a great job in taking his agency to the next level in terms of readiness for all types of disasters, to include hurricanes. So I know that Ms. Ravenel likes to talk about generators. The generators that we operate and maintain are in working order. We have 62 fixed generators throughout our 5 campuses, with 5 mobile generators that one of the fixed generators go down, these mobile generators can power, our cottages and or administrative buildings, some of the buildings. Next Wednesday, we have a annual emergency preparedness meeting. We'll invite all, providers and facility administrators, where we're talking about our readiness and plans. And we also usually have a speaker from the South Carolina Emergency Management Division to come talk to us about things that we can look forward to in terms of added safety. But for the center standpoint, we take an all hazards approach. So it's not just preparing for hurricanes. We prepare for pandemics, and to include influenza, as well as in these days and times, we're having active shooter drills and training. So any questions relative to our preparedness?
One
Yes,
quick
ma'am.
question. We're supplying generators, is that just for residential facilities, is that for?
Well, the generators I'm speaking of are all maintained at the regional centers. The generators I think you're talking about are part of hazard mitigation grants through FEMA, where agencies qualified. And I believe there was an update given by Mary during one of her reports. But that's been an excellent project. I think going forward, the request to the commission is going to be to split the state match requirement. In years past, DDSN has absorbed 100% of the state match, to participate in that grant. So I think we'll definitely, and maybe that's something that you all may want to ratify now or suspend it, but because we do qualify for a hazard mitigation grant, for some prior storms. And I guess going forward, we're seeking information from providers in some of those affected areas. But if we participate in this,
We're not in a position where we're actually making the application yet, right?
we made the application, or we want to make the application for some additional county hazard, next hazard mitigation grant.
Pending right now?
Yes.
We had, it closed yesterday, we have one person waiting for it.
Okay. And that's an excellent.
All but 7 counties have it, or in process, or can't get it because of, they don't have enough power outages.
Yeah.
But what, counties, that means the DSN board?
Yes.
Okay, and are QPLs eligible for these grants as well? For their facilities?
Yeah, the plan was to install these fixed assets for providers that operate day programs so that they can house large numbers of individuals.
Okay.
That's where we usually evacuate people to, those programs.
Okay.
I'm going to table that question a little bit. We may circle back to it because we have to deal with our core issue.
Okay.
Before we go on to the next item, if we can just have the record reflect that Commissioner Thompson has left.
Yeah.
Formally, before we get to item H.
Okay. Just a real quick update, video surveillance is going well at Coastal Center. Have substantial completion. We've also asked for code links to visit Levy, Midlands, and Witten Center to provide specifications to add video surveillance, all of those residential and day program facilities, and we're coordinating a visit at PD Center. And for the sake of time, you can see that this is the way they look at Coastal Center. We're in the process of getting consents from families for the folks that reside with us at Coastal Center. To date, I think we've got more than 100, so we're about 35, I think, short. And to this date, nobody's really abstained or really obstinate. It's just some of the families need a little bit more explanation. Some of the individuals that we support have families that just need to, better understand of the process. So we plan to go live by June 1st, and if it requires some of us getting in our state cars, going to visit some of these family members to help explain, we'll do that. So we're not going to rush implementation date because we want to do it right. We want to make sure that our staff and the folks that we serve are informed. As you can see, these look, aesthetically pleasing, and we think it'll provide an added layer of accountability and safety.
Except for the 2,000.
There's no money in the budget. Any questions on video surveillance?
Who's gonna like monitor the surveillance? Like, how's that gonna work?
Good question. We have a plan that we're actually gonna designate our quality assurance, and I believe maybe the facility administrator, they have to view an allotment of footage per week and document it for training purposes, as well as if we see anything for teachable moments. But then if there's an incident or allegation, we'll go back to the time frame to review these. I think our contract with the company, we're able to retain footage, I think, for 60 days, and it overruns. I can't remember the specifically now.
Right.
Like the time we've been in here with no lunch, but.
Endurance run.
I'm so tired. The director is
This
going to
is-
take anybody else who stays to the end, they're going to take them out to lunch.
All right, any questions on video surveillance?
No, thank you. All right. Analysis, current waiting list.
So when you get towards the end of the agenda and you're told to be really brief, you start reconsidering your slides.
Yes.
So
Good.
you have reports in your folders, and this is the routine that every quarter we do a quarterly update. I'm just going to highlight those reports really quick without going through my slides.
Thank you.
If don't mind.
Yes.
In your tab 7, you have this first document called waiver process performance. I believe that's the order. And that's going to provide information about the available waiver slots, the budgeted waiver slots, kind of our history over time and how we've been progressing, just to provide comparison of our current point in time versus the past. The second report is where I really wanted to spend most of the time in the presentation today, because it's really kind of a rolling number looking at the waiting lists, removing duplication, because as we know, we've always encouraged with the community supports waiver and the intellectual disability related disabilities waiver that people get on both waiting lists.
Yes.
So to get a real number, I mean, combining the two waiting lists, it looks like many people, 15,000 people are estimated. It's gone up over time since new funding has changed. However, when this report breaks it down so we can get to know the waiting list a little bit better. So it's looking at individuals over 21 as a subset, as well as those under 21. So the assumption here through this report is that some people have access to other services while they're waiting. They could also be enrolled in another waiver as one of those services. For children who are, or children or youth who are obviously under 21, they have access to school-age services. They may be Medicaid, may be receiving other state and Medicaid services. They too could be enrolled in another waiver. So the real number gets down closer to about 2,500, 2,600 people. So that's the purpose of that report, is just to describe more characteristics of those waiting.
Because when you think someone's on a waiting list, they're getting nothing. They're out there with no services. And if you're under 21, you get everything on Medicaid except for respite.
Right.
So I'll take questions about this, and certainly I can go into detail if you'd like to.
You can also email any questions you might have.
Yes, I take phone calls and emails and personal, anything.
Looks like our days pending are pretty steady, but IDRD is a little bit less right now. Is that right? Okay.
So I'll just say as my last point, is that over time we've been working to increase how quickly an individual can get enrolled in a waiver. So pending time being long is not good. I'm trying to fix that. And so we're doing a number of procedural steps in order to shorten that time. And I'll just highlight those quickly. Most of these new process changes are DDSN changes that we'll be doing internally. We'll be awarding additional case management units in order for the to expedite enrollment.
Is that global?
Families, at least, yes.
Yes, it is.
In
right.
case where a person does not have Medicaid, we're using state-funded case management, but we're trying to get them Medicaid eligible and make sure we're considering all of the Medicaid categories. Did you know there are there are more than a handful. of Medicaid categories. We're also contacting families at least 3 months prior to getting a slot to make sure that they understand the enrollment process is starting. And then we're using some expectations of timelines so that case managers and families have a good communication. Knowing, enrollment means you're trying to get something to start, so decisions and processes have to be continuous. So we'll be expecting enrollment within 6 months of the slot award. Every month after 6 months, we're require some sort of extension. And after 12 months, then we involve really verifying with the state director what's happening with that, because we really don't think it should take 12 months or really past 6 months to work through the system to get an individual enrolled. So I wanted to make sure the commission was aware of that procedural shift that we're making. It's not a policy change, it's a procedure. How can I help you?
So, going back to the bigger discussion that we had about the bands, I don't know, maybe you or Mary can answer this question, but when we get to a place where the bands are where we want them to be, where we're not so close to being in the red, and, just having that I forgot how you referred to it, but non-contingent, just no buffer for anything. Ultimately, I would say, again, I'm just kind of looking at the big picture, but I'm trying to connect the pieces to things. In looking at a list that says, 3,000 people are rating right now, and they've been waiting, it's been at that level for a long time. Will the change in the band and give us more money to serve more people on these waiting lists eventually?
Yeah, the problem with the bands is we're sending the whole dollar amount out, so there's nothing left, because we've got slots, we just have no money attached to the slots. So you have to wait till somebody goes off of the waiver or chooses another waiver and then utilize that attrition slot, whereas we were allotted different slots, but all band payment has the money out.
There's no money to serve these folks.
Yes, and once we change the band Bs and the band Is, which are the community bands,
Right.
and then go to the residential where we're paying fee around the individual and collecting more federal dollars for our state dollars, yes, this whole situation will change. And then we can actually gin up the system by getting more waiver slots out there to people. Yes, ma'am. It'll have a huge effect on this.
Okay, good. All right.
Thank you.
It would be a Band-Aid in that case.
Right.
Quarterly quality management report. Ann, thank you.
I'll be as brief as possible. You have in your packets a two-page handout that covers the quarterly abuse and neglect and exploitation reporting, the critical incidents, and the death reporting. A couple of highlights I just want to share with you. First of all, I'm very pleased to report that the number of arrests is way down. We're like at 20% of where we were last fiscal year. We've actually had 3 arrests in community residential programs year to date. We're projecting 4 as an annualized rate. I do want to caution you that number of 83 for the allegations that will have some sort of standard of care finding is low. That number will go up as we continue through the fiscal year. So don't be shocked when I come back to you next quarter and it's higher. There's just a delay in actually receiving the reports from the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman's office. So we're tracking that. As we look at the deaths, we do have a slight uptick in the number of deaths. We have 60 for the end of the third quarter. We're projecting 80 for the year if we continue at the same rate. 53 of those deaths have been for persons aged 60 and above. We've actually had 3 deaths for people above the age of 80 and 2 for people that were in their 90s. We've had 7 deaths related to people that were receiving hospice care. As you flip over to the critical incident information, our numbers are down overall. We have had an increase in the number of law enforcement reports. Most of that has to do with aggression that's occurring within the residential setting. We also have an uptick in the number of choking-related incidents that are being reported as critical incidents. We're monitoring that closely. We know that we have 17 people that have had repeat incidents. We have 2 that have had choking incidents within a couple of weeks or a month apart. So we're monitoring that very closely. We know that 22 people have had some sort of disciplinary action, and typically that's because they may not be interpreting the dietary order for bite size or the specific size of the the altered diet. We will continue to provide information on that as the year progresses. You'll also see that there are a number of recommendations there on the side that have come out of our executive staff meetings and risk management meetings. In summary, we are really encouraging providers to be proactive, to know the people that they're supporting, making sure they're equipping staff to adequately support the folks in services. We're really focusing on the unannounced visits and making, or better utilizing that process. As management staff go into various locations to do an unannounced visit, that's a great time to have a teachable moment with staff, to monitor what's going on, to look at that interaction, to look at the documentation, to talk with staff about what kind of training they might need, making sure it's not the once and done approach to training. And also looking at some of the HCBS settings rule information to make sure that people are really integrated. But I think that providers can continue to improve what they're doing with unannounced visits and use that for many different purposes. If you have any questions about those recommendations or any information on the report, I'll be happy to.
Any questions?
How do you want to do them?
Questions? Okay, all right, thank you, Ann. All right, next item, State Director's Report.
Okay, keep your tab open to that 8 tab, the first page. I just want to let you know that most of the time I do my Director's Report, I talk about the EI update, the case management update, that's what I do. And since all that was been covered, I just got some other stuff. The organizational changes have begun. We've started reorganizing the agency. It's slowly, because we're trying to fit people into the functions that we require. But one of the big moves were that quality QM and QI, that's how I'm calling them. QM is the measurement and the IMS system that Ann is doing. And I've added a quality improvement arm to that as sort of the other side of it. So one measures performance, the other one drives it, so you can measure it and drive it and whatever. So that's under the risk management umbrella at the moment. Those ladies, that's Hester Wanamaker and Ann Dalton, they're going to be reporting to me until we can develop that risk management position and get someone hired to do that. We have our first department meeting tomorrow, actually. So this page is just, for me, I would like to see this more developed, but at this point, with my time restrictions on what I have, because I go out a lot about case management, I have taken our analysis in our risk management meetings that we have seen either red flags or best practices that we need to communicate to the provider community. And so even though you have all the statistics right here, I went ahead and just put some practical things you should be doing to get those numbers down. And it's really just management tools, and it's not anything that we haven't done before, but I am sending it out to the provider network as, you know, the lessons learned is someone got arrested, this is what you do. Or the lesson learned is someone died, this is what you need to be thinking about when you're doing this. So one of those things is making sure you're doing a bathing supervision level, especially for individuals who have seizure issues or other medical needs, which is not in our requirements anymore, but it should be. So we're going to be putting that back in. Operations, Rufus's department, he's putting his team together, so he's getting some people to go out there, and we're doing more of this team training. If you heard, when they went out to these boards, they did not go out with just case management. It was case management, a fiscal person, an auditing person, because we're trying to educate the financial staff to the issues that they're going to have to deal with too, and trying to keep all this together. So it's not a one-part approach. Again, Chris Clark starts on the 3rd, and he's going to be building the finance unit. He's a provider consultant, and he's very good at what he does. I've known him for a very long time. And what we're trying to do here is strengthen the agency's position to assist providers remain strong to deliver quality services to the individuals we support. Quality service, any level of organization, whether it's HR, whether it's finance, that needs to be job one. The DSP curriculum in high schools is moving ahead with the pilot program being implemented in August 2019 in York, of course, because the director of the technical school in York, the principal, was one of my board chairs back in the day. So he was really on board with this, and then Michelle Schaefer at Max Abilities has allowed the interns to come into her building. So we're going to build the curriculum, pilot it there, and then move it out next year to the other places. But I think they've got 24 kids in the CNA DSP program. They haven't picked which arm they're going into yet. The project's being spearheaded by our transition coordinator, Laura Elder, and supervised by Susan Beck. Person-centered thinking training with case managers is underway. We've trained 135 so far. When through, we will have trained 370 based on registrations to date, which is basically the entire case management provider community. Which is also a billable start. When you do the person-centered plan, it is billable. So, and it is a good way to really get to know your families. The plans to move forward, providing this training to residential coordinators and day program coordinators. Those are the folks who write day program plans and residential plans. So with this whole thing being said, it was my plan. I wanted to train them all together. Case manager, day program person, residential person, so they all heard it together. But we're working in the middle of our transition plan to this new billing system. I knew I only had July 1 to get them all done. Because I don't want them here saying, well, that's not a billable service. So we didn't want to take them out of service for training. And again, I want to say publicly, I do not have the Mercer report, but I do have faith that the report will be out in time to inform the next budget go-round. Because if there's increases in rates, we are really going to have to do some analysis as to how this is going to inform what we're asking from the General Assembly.
The Mercer report analyzes
the rates.
What rates?
Well,
What services?
pretty much all of them.
Every service?
I think so. I think they've gone through all the services. I think not something like LPN or anything like that, that's on the next go round.
Okay.
It was all our residential rates. So the different CTH 1, 2, SLP 1, 2, supervised living program 1, supervised living program 2, community training home 1, community training home 2, CRCF, community residential care facilities. And I do believe they're also doing an ICF rate. They're working on that now too. Also respite, because that's a biggie, because we have internal audit right now working on understanding the issues with respite and the fact that there is nothing consistent about it from anywhere. So we need to come up with a consistent, we're working on that. You know, I wish I could get it all fixed in a day. I don't want to disappoint anybody, but it'll get done. Thank you. I appreciate that. There's also an interagency coalition starting with VSS. We had our first strategic planning meeting with Adult Protective Services and Department of Mental Health. They were there. They were there at the table, and us and AARP and a few other folks, because Adult Protective Services serves more than our people. And we're at the beginning phase of a collaborative to build a complex case resolution process over time. And in June, I'll be participating pretty much, I think there's 4 meetings planned, right? 4 meetings with the governor's roundtable discussion of children's issues. So I'm glad to be invited, because every time I go to these meetings, I'm like, what about our kids? You know, I mean, they sort of forget. So that is where I'm going. Okay.
That's the executive director's report?
That is the executive director's report.
Okay. Next on the agenda was the executive session. However, basically, well, not basically, due to Commissioner Thompson having to leave, we no longer have a quorum which is effective to vote to go into executive session. So we will have to bypass the executive session, which means we are setting our next regular meeting for June 20th, and we will be adjourned. Thank you all for being patient with us.